The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello everybody, welcome. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. We are back here on the 11th of July 2026 for another live stream, live reading. This is going to be part 8 in our series, reading through the 1958 book Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Rene. Worms, a critically important text that gets overlooked. It does get mentioned by some researchers, Alan Watt, Richard Grove. I think Jay Dyer might have talked about it a bit as well. But it's an amazing slice of history from a time when people were more skeptical, from a time when people were less liable to just believe and trust and have faith in organizations just because they had benign sounding names, right? Back then, I think there was a lot more skepticism around wealthy people and the groups that they set up and things like charity and things like philanthropy, okay? I think here in 2026, those of us who pay attention to the kinds of topics we discuss on this channel, we've rediscovered that healthy skepticism of charity and philanthropy. But I think for the average Joe Sixpack and Jane Champagne, that's a phrase that I heard Alan Watt use recently on one of his talks from 2007. They're not really caring so much about associations and boards and committees and think tanks and foundations and charities and NGOs and I think there's many, many more labels that I can't come up with off the top of my head here. But this book captures what happened when a group of people got together to investigate these tax-exempt organizations to see what they were up to. And it's meticulously documented. And this book is one of those treasures that I have in my library, which perfectly exemplifies why collecting books is a never-ending mission, because you get a book such as this, and then you end up adding another 10 books to your collection based on the things that are referenced within this book. And I showed some of those on last week's stream. For example, the two that I'm really excited to look into are Collectivism on the Campus. Let's see if I can hold this up the right way. Collectivism on the Campus and The Claims of Sociology, A Critique of Textbooks. Merrill and Hobbes, respectively, who've written those. Very excited to get into those at some point, because a large part of what this book covers, the Foundations book, is sociology and the social sciences, right? And is it really a science? No. Spoiler alert, it's not a science. It's you send out a bunch, basically this is how sociology and social sciences work. You send out a bunch of questionnaires, and then you extrapolate from the results of those questionnaires rules and insights and observations and truths, which then are used to recommend policy, which then gets passed through our bought and paid for petitions. It gets signed into law, and then we'll get beaten over the head by the various instruments of the state, which are designed and well-funded and put in place to do that. And then we all have to obey or, lose our privileges. They're not freedoms, they're privileges. They're corporate privileges that we get by participating in this system. And yeah, that's a whole different rabbit hole, an area of investigation that we're not going to get into today, but it all links, and it's all quite a fascinating history in how we got to where we are in 2026, how the systems and the structures have been put into place, and how they're all doing exactly what they're supposed to do. That is the big takeaway, ladies and gentlemen, is that the system is not broken. It's functioning perfectly, and what is happening right now is exactly what is supposed to be happening. So thank you for being here. If you're tuning in live, thank you for being here. If you're watching on the replay, I do have a little preamble ramble to get into today before we start today's reading. But we're going to be embarking upon chapter 7, which I'm very excited about because it's all about foreign policy. The chapter is called Foundation Impact on Foreign Policy, and the first section is all about internationalism. So when we hear these various internet personalities and researchers and talking heads talking about the globalists, talking about the internationalists, then we're going to be learning about how these types of people wield power, how they leverage their money, how they sidestep taxation, and how they keep control of the systems which they themselves benefit from. That's one of the strange aspects of this story, is that wealthy industrialists such as Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, they all made their money in a system and then built these foundations and pumped massive amounts of that money into subverting and undermining the very system which got them the wealth in the first place. And that seems contradictory. It's strange on the face of it, and people find that a bit of a head scratcher to contemplate. But once you've made it to the top, you want to make sure that you and your progeny stay on the top. So it's not that surprising when you think about it, right? If the system has allowed you to get to the top, you want to climb that ladder, and then you want to kick that ladder down, right? Or better still, you want to pull that ladder up so no one else can use it. That's a better metaphor. And so that's probably a useful way of thinking about why these capitalists, industrialists make these vast fortunes, and then they funnel that money into groups, academics, experts who recommend policies which prevent other people from doing the same, basically transforming the system more towards a socialistic, communistic, technocratic type of system. Okay, so there's this long, ongoing continuity there of reducing people's actual freedoms, granting them privileges, then taking those privileges away, and seeing that where people at one time might have had a lot more autonomy in their lives, they could grow food, they could keep animals, they could build property. Now it's all permits, regulations, licenses, permissions, inspections. Just recently, sort of anecdote about this. Our bin that we put all our rubbish into for collection by the local council every 2 weeks, we've been filling it, and a couple of days before collection is due. And so I went to apply for a larger bin, because some of the houses around where I live have larger bins. We've got this very thin, sort of small version of the normal sized bin. So I apply for it, and there's all this information they got to get. You have to make an account. You have to give them details of who you are, phone number. You got to obviously give them your address. Then you have to tell them whether or not you're registered to vote. You have to tell them how many children are in the family, what diseases or medical conditions you might have that would necessitate a larger bin. They say they might send somebody around to inspect your recycling, to check that you're recycling everything that you can. Like, I'm paying all this money to the local council by way of council tax. It goes up every 3 months or every 6 months. It goes up. And I'm not even allowed to get a slightly larger bin. I'm not even allowed to make the decision for myself whether I and my household and my family need a larger bin. That requires an application, data collection, possible inspections from people. It's going to be reviewed by various people, and then if my application is rejected, I don't get to ask again for another 12 months when my case will be reconsidered. That's just to get a bin. That's just so I don't have to have dirty nappies in my home and rubbish, waste food, that sort of thing building up inside my home. And I can't leave it on the street because then you've got the wildlife and the animals coming around. But I'm not allowed a bigger bin so that I can put it in the bin outside my house. I have to now store that in my house. And this was actually captured in a TV series. I think it was Korean or maybe Japanese. It was called something like Number 9 Game, I think it was called. And the concept, it's similar to the Squid Games. The concept is the contestants live in a sort of high rise, one on top of the other. The people at the very top, they enjoy the biggest rooms, the most luxury, and they have this system where they get money every hour or something, and they get the most money every hour. It's a really like ham-fisted metaphor for society. But the waste from the people living at the top gets put in a lift, and then the lift goes down a level, and then the people in the compartment below put their waste in, and then it goes down a level, and the people put their waste until the lift which carries the waste gets to the very bottom, and then it just stays there, and the guy in the bottom has to store it and deal with it. And he's in a tiny little compartment. He's getting the least amount of money each day for being in the show, because it's supposed to be a kind of game show type situation that's all live streamed and monitored, and people watch it for entertainment. And he has to just basically process and package and store all this waste from all the higher levels in his room. And his room gets smaller and smaller and smaller as he's taking in their waste and packaging it into his little hovel that he lives in. So this is kind of where it's going to this. You don't get to throw anything away anymore. All the waste you produce, you have to store and process yourself. And if you do want to throw it away, you'll be paying more fines, and you'll be getting your digital programmable money deducted. Every piece of rubbish that you produce might have some sort of RFID chip in it that gets scanned as they're collecting it and taking it away. This is like the micromanagement of every single small aspect of your supposedly free life, living in your private home that you either rent or pay a mortgage on, or maybe you own it outright, but you don't because you still got to pay property taxes on it, right? So this is where it's going. Full scale surveillance and invasion of everything that ever happens, monitoring and punishing when you disobey whatever the policy that is being created and funded by foundations, by experts who receive this grant money to recommend these changes. We're going to look at some of those today in the Preamble Ramble. This is where it's heading. And this book is an amazing insight into how it was done, and a fantastic analysis of the problems and of the ideologies behind these so-called non-profit, tax-exempt, politically neutral organizations, right? We find out that they're anything but. So I'll give a shout out to Justin Burns in the chat. Says Alan Watt is a timeless man. I totally agree. I continue to reap massive rewards from listening to his talks. I really like the 2006, 2007 era. There are some of my favorite ones are in there. And Justin Burns also says it gets expensive in reference to the book buying. Yes, it does. You can just ask my wife. And also, social science destroyed our education system. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the topic of the previous chapter, chapter 6 and chapter 5, actually. Both those chapters were dealing with radicalism in education and how social science really was a Trojan horse which was used to bring leftist, socialist, communist type radicalism into the system via the schools, right? And we were told about in this book about schools that had to, for example, abandon their religious affiliation in order to secure grant money from these foundations. So there's strings attached to this money, and then the money dictates which research gets funded, which groups of experts and researchers get to carry out their quote-unquote science, to then recommend the policy, which then gets put into place by think tanks. We're going to look at one of those in a moment. The last chapter was called Revolution is Nearly Accomplished. And the first thing we're going to do is review some of those notes from the last chapter, because I think there's some key takeaways here that are worth revisiting and reminding ourselves. So I'm just going to try and get my notes ready to display. Here they are. And then we'll go over here and start our little review. So this is a review of chapter 6, right? And a few key points that are worth bringing up, which help set the stage for what we're going to review this introduction and also read in today's chapter. So in this last chapter, Wormser claimed that America has undergone a third American Revolution. But it wasn't a violent revolution. It was a bloodless revolution, he called it. And this revolution was a movement that was attempting to create what Wormser called the paternal state, right? So this is mummy and daddy government looking after you, making sure you're okay. The social safety net, which is funded by other people, tax-paying people, right? It's the doling out of the haves and giving it to the have-nots. But in many cases, this system is broken. It's not fair. It's not at all. It's rife for abuse. There's a lot of loopholes. There's a lot of ways in which this is stacked against certain groups and in favor of other groups. We'll find a little more about that as well later on when we look at an example of a think tank. So it's the building of this paternal state via a third revolution, which was bloodless. Now, this word revolution comes up over and over again. We've looked at the first global revolution by the Club of Rome think tank. There's also a book, because if you remember, that book's called The First Global Revolution. But Lionel Curtis wrote a book called World Revolution in the Cause of Peace. Oh yes, it's always, it's always for something good, like peace. And so Lionel Curtis was writing about world revolution back in 1949. And Lionel Curtis, of course, was foundational in the establishing of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which we learn a lot about from researchers such as Richard Grove, Alan Watt. The Royal Institute for International Affairs, it features heavily in Carroll Quigley's work, Tragedy and Hope, but especially the Anglo-American Establishment, which was published posthumously. And he was expressing concern for his safety and the safety of a student who was interviewing him on a recording that was taken, I think, in the 70s before he died. So this word revolution, okay, it happens all the time. We've got the French Revolution, we got the American revolutions, and this is the third one, and Worms is telling us. And it's happened very quietly, very subtly, very gradually in a sort of Fabian socialist style. It's bloodless, and it's bringing us into this paternal state. So it's to do with infantilizing people, with pushing them towards a brave new world type of situation where they just play games and enjoy Bumble Frugal, Pumple Nicky, or whatever the game's called in Brave New World, hypertrophic spinning doodahs. I can't remember. It's got some crazy name like that, but they play games all day and they just sleep around with each other. And nobody really does anything serious or takes life seriously, because the paternal state provides everything. It gives you your hourly dose of soma that you can take whenever you feel a bit sad or angry or bored or despondent. When any of those nagging doubts creep in about maybe something's wrong here, maybe we need to do something about this situation, maybe we're being lied to, just take your soma and forget about it, right? So this paternal state, that's what we're moving towards. That's basically where we're at here in 2026. But Worms had told us in that last chapter that individual liberty, so the liberty of the individual, is subordinated to a misused theory of what he called the greatest good for the greatest number, right? So a word for this is collectivism. That's why the book Collectivism on the Campus is so interesting. And collectivism is what we learn about from researchers such as Geo Griffin. I read his excellent book on the channel, The Fearful Master. Read that book in its entirety. It's a really good one, worth revisiting, all about the UN and some of the atrocities that organization was involved in. But this idea, the greatest good for the greatest number, it subordinates individual liberty. And so Worms is saying that the revolution, he actually describes it as nearly finished, because he originally says that it's underway and it's happening, but in this book, 1958, he says it's pretty much done. The only thing we can hope for now is a counter-revolution, is another revolution. A counter, I suppose, just to reverse the revolution that we just went through. But, you know, that's the game of politics, isn't it? Right? The red team come in and they do a bunch of stuff, and then the blue team come in and say, oh, we got to undo all this stuff the red team did, but they leave a few things undone. And then the red team come back in and they say, oh, we've got to undo all this stuff that the blue team did, but the few things they leave in. And this is how the totalitarian tiptoe happens. It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. With every revolution, with every counter-revolution, with every election, with every selection, with every cycle, we're actually inching ever closer. And I think that progress is accelerating now in the age of technology and AI and surveillance capitalism and full spectrum dominance of our minds at all times. It's quite alarming, but foundations played a key role in this, in getting us here. They helped drive this revolution, Wormser tells us, or told us in the last chapter, by acting as a, quote, informal but integral arm of government. So in England, we have what we call these things arm's length bodies. I, as part of my job, I worked in one of these arm's length bodies. And it's like, you're part of the government, but you're not. We'll keep you at arm's length. Like, we're funding you, and we're overseeing everything you do, and we're giving you your tax money, and you have to meet our requirements and our demands and do what we tell you to do. But you're not part of the government. You're an arm's length body. Right. So this informal but integral arm of government quote here reminds me of that. These are groups which, you know, like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Brookings Institute. These groups, they're all part of the same group, right? They're the same people. They're the same class of people. I wouldn't even say the politicians. I would just say they're the managers. They're the bureaucrats. They're the administrators. You know, I'm reminded of Colonel Mandel House. He wrote a book called Philip Drew Administrator, in which a fictional governmental collapse occurred, and then an administrator took over and saved the day, right? So these are the governments, the foundations, the charities, the NGOs, the think tanks, the policy. They're all the same. They're all the same people, really, but they just have different names for themselves that are benign sounding and boring sounding, and people don't look into them. People don't do any investigation into their links, their overlaps, and the boring long documents that they put out. Of course, nobody wants to read those. But that's what foundations are, according to Wormser. He said that the revolutionary impulse comes partly from Marxists and was communist inspired. And he traced that into the published quotes and works of the various people who received foundation funding. Wormser moved from communist penetration to socialist penetration, and he was saying, of the educational institutes and other groups, he was saying that these are basically the same thing. The quote is that Wormser said, it's difficult to mark the line beyond which socialism becomes communism. This ties in very well with the book Fabian Freeway. We read that on the channel as well. That's under the playlists. A lot of quotes from various communists and socialists admitting and accepting and explaining that socialism and communism are the same thing. It's the same destination in mind. It's just a different route on how to get there. So Wormser backs this up as well, saying socialism has, quote, the same ends as communism. Right? It's going to the same place. For example, socialism and communism share central planning, public ownership, state control of production and consumption, and confiscatory measures. And both ideologies are utopian systems promising paradise on earth. And at this point, I will just remind people that very soon I'm going to have a new episode of Hayes Interviews, and I'm going to be talking to Daniel McCarthy, you can see his name there at the bottom, about his book, The Story of Nowhere, which is all about utopianism and charts the continuity of that way of thinking from ancient history, ancient philosophy, right up to the present day by way of socialism, communism, and technocracy. So it's a very excellent little pocketbook primer on utopianism. I'm just working with him at the moment to set up a good time to record that interview. But it's coming. It's going to be the next episode of Hayes Interviews. So yeah, socialism, communism, they're utopian systems, and they're going to deliver paradise on Earth one day, maybe, sort of, if we just chop a few more heads off and if we just get control of absolutely everything, then eventually, honestly, we promise it really will be paradise. Trust us. We're experts. But Wormser reminds us that socialism cannot exist without force and oppression. He talked as well about the free market for ideas, and he also calls it the battlefield of ideas at an earlier point in the book. But he says that this has declined because of foundations disproportionately supporting the utopian socialists. So the ideas that get the most funding, they get the most amplification, and then they seem to be winning the battle. But it's only because of the way they are pushed through media, various media outlets and various media channels. When you fund an idea and you spread it and you get it out there and you get people talking about it, it seems like it's winning and it seems like it's popular because it's a good idea, but it's just actually got a massive budget for marketing, and that's what gets it out there. It's like Coke and Pepsi, right? All over the world. It's a terrible drink, terrible for your health. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows you shouldn't drink it. You can probably clean toilets with it, would be better use. But because of its enormous budget and marketing, it's out there, and people think it's totally okay to drink it and give it to their children. But it's deep down, everybody knows it's poison. But the marketing budget is just so powerful. So finally, for this bit of the notes, was the idea that foundation executives are accused of supporting, quote, change for change's sake, and they overlook what is good and what should be preserved. So that was a theme that came up again and again, was that these experts that were receiving this funding, they just want to smash and break and destroy and tear down and make way for the new. Out with the old, in with the new is the basic approach, without any care or concern for the things that are working, for the things that are good, for the benefits that are being realized. Just throw it all out, make way for our system of total control in the name of equity and equality and fairness and justice. So it's that adage that's preserved on the Fabian window and in the inscription to the First Global Revolution, where they say they want to remold it nearer the heart's desire. What they don't talk about so much is that you got to smash it all to bits first. So Wormser argued that legal promotion of socialism does not make it less subversive. And actually, the aim is to replace the Declaration of Independence and Constitution in the U.S. And J. Edgar Hoover was quoted as well as saying, this was an interesting quote, he said that communists do their most effective work through, quote, fictitious liberals. So fake people, in other words. People who are only saying what they say because that's how you get the money. Actors. People who are just puppets because they're doing the bidding of the people with the cash. Those who control the purse, right? So the chapter criticizes Pendleton Herring and Paul Hoffman as influential foundation-linked figures who dismissed anti-communist investigations as hysteria or witch hunts. We got Frank in the chat. Did I say this evening again? I'm so used to doing these at nighttime that I keep saying it's evening. It's not evening, it's morning. It's 10 a.m. in the morning. Thank you for reminding me. One of these days, I will actually refer to the correct time of day on these live streams. We've also got Faith on. In Switzerland, they only take designated bin bags that cost 60 cents a piece. Some people have bin bag compressors to squeeze as much as possible in. Wow. Switzerland, that bastion of freedom and democracy, yeah? Oh, I see, Frank. I just understood you were watching part 7 instead of this one, part 8. So hopefully I didn't mention this evening again. You're confusing me now, and now we're just confusing each other in a nice little feedback loop of confusion. But welcome. It's good to have you here, and I'm glad you're enjoying the lovely summer morning in Dublin. It's lovely here as well, in my neck of the woods. Okay, so that's a little recap. I do have a few more notes to go through before we get into the preamble ramble. So this was the second part of chapter 6, which had some important stuff in there as well. A big focus on this word subversive. What does it mean? What is subversive? We think of subversion, typically it might be you set off a bomb in a factory, right? You do some sort of damage to property or to facilities which impairs the normal day-to-day functioning. Subversion is often, I think, linked in our minds to like terrorism, terroristic activities. But Wormser kind of makes the case and reminds us really that subversion doesn't have to be explosive. It could be what he calls a gradual undermining. And he also says it could be a persistent chipping away at foundations upon which beliefs rest. So that's a very appropriate and apt description in a book that discusses foundations, because we have beliefs and we have values, and they are built upon something. And in many cases, it could be a holy text, it could be a religious belief system or practice that you observe. It could be philosophical, right? It could be logical. It might be a cultural thing that you have adopted and downloaded from your family and friends and the people around you that you've been raised by, and teachers that have taught you in school and that sort of thing. But you do have beliefs, and they are built upon some sorts of foundations. Now, one of those foundations might be, for example, moral objectivity, moral objectivism. There is such a thing as right and wrong. How you arrive at that decision about what is right and wrong, there's different routes to get there, okay? But you might have this foundational belief that right and wrong exist, and they can be identified, and right behavior and wrong behavior can be called out and observed. And then other people might come along and say, well, no, that's not true, right? Actually, it's relative. There's just moral relativity. One man's good is another man's bad. And therefore, who are you to say what is good and what is bad, and what is right and what is wrong? We all make that up for ourselves. Okay. So this is a pertinent example, because we were told earlier in the book that John Dewey of the Dewey Decimal System was a massive moral relativist, and he did a lot to undermine the foundation of moral objectivity, which leads to a more stable society because more people agree on what is right and wrong. And therefore you can, to a certain element, you can use this to control people, right? That it can function in that way, but it also functions in the way of making a more harmonious society, a more harmonious culture that people can grow up in. A good example might be the Vietnamese culture, right? People there are pretty much 100% aligned in what is right and what is wrong, what the correct behavior is and what the incorrect behavior is. Their culture and country hasn't, could be argued that it's in the process of being subverted, but it hasn't gone as far down the path as, say, we have in some of the Western nations, the Western countries, where there's all sorts of depravity and degeneracy and deviance behavior celebrated and accepted and encouraged and taught, in fact, to our young people. So when you have an objective moral framework within which people agree and act, you can have more of a cohesive, stable society for a larger population, right? Now, if you want to undermine that, if you want to subvert that, then you're going to start pushing some moral relativism, some moral relativity. And that's a good example of what he's getting at here. This persistent chipping away, right, at the foundations. So it's not, you don't just throw it all out all at once and have this very forceful, sudden, severe change. You just gradually, slowly, little by little, work towards gaining concessions, gaining ground. Just a little bit here and a little bit there. Totalitarian tiptoe, as I already mentioned. So in the end of chapter 6, he was telling us that society does not grant tax exemption for the privilege of undermining itself. That's a really powerful quote from that section of the book. Society does not grant tax exemption for the privilege of undermining itself. Because remember, these organizations receive tax exempt status because they're supposed to be doing something for the public good. And they're supposed to be apolitical. They're supposed to only do things for the public good. And yet what they are found to be doing by the Rees Committee and the Cox Committee before that was to undermine society, to undermine the bedrock foundational beliefs and views that people build their lives on. And so again, like always, the public taxpayers pay for their own subversion, their own enslavement, their own destruction, their own pain, really. You get it. You pay for it because it's all tax money that does this. Wormser told us that tax-exempt grants are supposed to strengthen the society that permits them. And he claims that many major social science projects funded by foundations were actually subversive of American moral, political, and economic principles. These projects are accused of using, quote, spurious claims to science to gain privilege status. So this is where your social science comes in, and all the nonsense that was put in the textbooks, which were put in the schools by experts and academics that were receiving foundation grant money. So a reminder as well of one of the important texts we talked about on the last stream, which was the American Historical Association's Commission on Social Studies. There's a volume of this called Conclusions and Recommendations, and there is not a physical copy available online. If you can find one, grab it. But this book is one of the key texts that's referred to in Charlotte Iserbyt's book. I can't get it off the shelf, but it's back there. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Charlotte Iserbyt was succeeded by John Kleitchek, who did a book called School World Order, and he does excellent talks. You can look him up if you can figure out how to spell his last name. Your best bet is to look up the book title, School World Order, and then dig his talks up. And then you've also got John Taylor Gatto. He did the Underground History of American Education. There's those two big, gigantic books lengthways over there on that shelf. Both of those books refer to this American Historical Association Commission on Social Studies because the conclusions it reached were effectively that out with the old and in with the new, like we said. It's time to have a more socialistic, communistic, collectivist type system. The report also admitted there was a flow of radical ideas into education. And Wormser also talked about national planning bodies and how these are evidence that foundation-supported ideas passed into government. So these national planning bodies, these are the policymakers, right? These are the quote-unquote experts who receive this funding, and the ideas that they come up with are overwhelmingly leftist, collectivist in nature, socialist and communist as well. So there was a proposal mentioned for a new Bill of Rights, which Wormser was criticizing, and that included rights to food, clothing, shelter, medical care, security, recreation, and adventure. And so this is the paternal state. Again, this is daddy, mummy, government taking care of you, making sure you've got your food, your clothing, your entertainment, your security, and your injections, right, to keep you healthy. Wormser presents this as the cradle-to-grave security concept, and he says that it's a socialist replacement for the original Bill of Rights. So they're doing away with the foundational documents and agreements, and they're reinventing and updating it for the new age, right? For the current day. They always say, "Oh, it's not fit for purpose anymore because because now we've got smartphones, so we need to change the Bill of Rights and the foundational constitutions of our countries." Wormser also mentioned this author, Robert A. Brady, and he did a book called Business as a System of Power. This book is described as alleging that capitalist economic power threatens democratic authority everywhere and always. Therefore, we need collectivism. Brady himself is presented as a collectivist who sees big business as authoritarian, feudal, anti-democratic, and linked to fascism. Wormser also talked to us about the American Labor Education Service, which is a Ford-supported, tax-exempt organization which is engaged in political education. So that's a key point as well, because earlier in the book, Wormser raises the question of when does education become propaganda, and what's the line between the two, and where do you draw it? Because a lot of these groups that were receiving funding were saying, well, we're just putting out educational materials, when actually it was left-leaning, collectivist, socialist propaganda. But they just called it, well, they got away with it because we're just educating people. We're just educating them, you know. A real loose, vague, wishy-washy definition of education there. But important to ask that question. So this ALES, they held conferences which stressed, quote, political action. So it's not just about education. Once you start calling for action, you're advocating real change, real political change in the world, right? So you become a political organization at that point. And Wormser linked this group to militant socialism, communist fronts, labor propaganda, songs, plays, and pamphlets. And Mark Starr was an example of an influential figure who was connected to this group, as well as the League for Industrial Democracy, formerly the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, but it rebranded itself. But one of the quotes on its Wikipedia page tells you that industrial democracy is socialism. It's a synonym. So the so it was the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, but when communism started taking a lot of heat because of all the dead people and the close links between socialism and communism were well known and admitted, they rebranded themselves, and instead of using the word socialism, they use the word industrial democracy, but it means the same thing. Mark Starr is also affiliated to UNESCO, right? The United Nations something science organization. I don't know the full title, but Julian Huxley, of course, was the first president of that group. And then also Truman's Commission on Higher Education. So Mark Starr is one we should look into at some point. And then finally, Wormser was telling us that several planks of the Communist Manifesto became part of American law. That's something I would really like to look into and verify, because I've heard it claimed in a number of places. Absolutely astounding if that is the case. These changes, he said, are attributed not to proletarian seizure of power, but to, quote, continuous propaganda in the form of biased education. So there you are. That's like propaganda and education they're like two sides of the same coin. He says in that last chapter 6, Marxian formula nearly persuaded Americans through education rather than revolution. So that's the Trojan horse, right? We're just educating people when actually it's a revolutionary Marxian system and set of beliefs that's being delivered. He said that intellectuals are accused of being remote from economic reality, they're idealistic, and they're vulnerable to impractical theories supported by incomplete empirical data. So these are the foundation-funded intellectuals and experts. Wormser also argued that socialism always requires the suppression of liberty, no matter whether it's achieved through force or propaganda. You have to suppress liberty in order to achieve socialism. And then at the very end of the last chapter, to balance it out a bit, Wormser did point out some anti-socialist, conservative, unorthodox work that did receive foundation funding. And there was a couple of books and authors mentioned at the end of that chapter as well. If anybody wants to go back and look those up, you should. So they're the notes and the recap, and they feed in nicely to what we have planned for the preamble ramble. And The first person I wanted to look at in the preamble is this guy here, E. Pendleton Herring. This is one of my favorite names that I've ever come across in any of the books, and we come across some pretty good names. It sounds like a made-up name. It sounds like George Counts being the education guru, and who was a head teacher and a director of a educational department, sorry. And his name is George Counts, right? This is Pendleton Herring, and we're going to look into him a little bit and find out maybe this is a red herring. But this is an interesting chap, and it's not a name that I'd come across anywhere else or heard anyone talk about before. No picture on his Wikipedia page, unfortunately. But E. Pendleton Herring, who was he, and what was he getting up to? Well, firstly to note, he was born in 1903 and he died in 2004. So he lived to be 100 years old. So he was obviously on the inside and had access to some of that high quality longevity technology that the rest of us don't get access to. And probably for his services, because as you're going to find out, he was involved in some pretty big stuff. So E. Pendleton Herring, he was an American political scientist, and he worked to advance the field of political science with his work as president of the American Political Science Association, also known as APSA. Now, immediately I have to say political science. Okay, is this like the science of sociology? Is this like social science? Is it really a science? Or are they just whacking the label of science on there to make it sound legitimate, to make it sound like it's a real thing that we have to take seriously and nod our heads and say, oh, Pendleton Herring, yes, political scientist, yes. Really, political science has to just be the science of controlling people and getting them to obey you, and getting them to continue paying their taxes while you fleece them, right? The sheep, the masses, the sheeple exist for the purpose of being fleeced by the shepherds. And so, yeah, the political science, maybe it is a science. It could be, in fact. But I think there is probably a very deep, hidden, occulted science of politics. But I think when we're told this person's a political scientist and the content of what they put out is probably nothing like what is actually known at the very highest levels of how to set up and run a country, a civilization from start to finish, through the beginnings, the flourishing golden age of growth and expansion, right through to the decadence of the inevitable collapse, you know? That whole process and how to make that happen is the true science, I think, at the highest level, known at the highest levels, as Alan Watt would remind us. But the political science that we are told and given, the exoteric version of it, as you might call it, I bet is just a lot of bunk, a lot of nonsense. But anyway, let's continue. So he was the president of APSA, and that wasn't the only group which he held influential positions in, as we'll see. But in addition to working as the 48th president of APSA, Pendleton Herring also served, because these are public servants, don't you know that these people are your servants? He served as Secretary of Graduate Education for Public Administration at Harvard. So he's in the elite education circles. And public administration, what's that? That's the managerial class. That is the group of people who don't want to do any of the work, but they want to manage the rest of us as we do the work. It's the people who stand there cracking the whips on the slave plantation, right? They don't want to pick the cotton themselves, but their job is to make sure you don't stop picking, and you make sure you pick your quota of cotton, otherwise you get lashed. Pendleton's scholarly works had a large impact on American political science and also influenced the American government, acting as the chief intellectual architect of the National Security Act of 1947. Right, so this is pretty big. E. Pendleton Herring was the chief intellectual architect. Funny they use that word, isn't it? It's always about buildings and building and architecture. Of the National Security Act of 1947. Why is that important? That's important because it culminated in the reorganization of the military and intelligence branches of the federal government, including the creation of the Department of Defense and the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the seeing eye of America, as Alan Watt calls it. The Central Intelligence Agency was created by the National Security Act, which was created by E. Pendleton Herring. So he's one of the most important political scientists of his generation, and his influence has helped shape political science as behavioral science. What? They just chucked that bit in there. What? So political science has been shaped as behavioral science. What's behavioral science? Well, that's managing people. That's manipulating people to do a certain thing, right? Behaviorism, that you're getting into the territory of Skinner and his dogs, and Pavlov. No, sorry, Pavlov had the dogs. B.F. Skinner also did a lot of behaviorism and experiments, though. And then you're getting into the realm of, the Stanford prison experiment and the Ash conformity experiments and these kinds of things. Excellent resource on these, by the way, is James Corbett's documentary Descent into Madness, but it's descent like D-I-S-S-E-N-T, not descent like as in going down. It's dissent as in dissenting against the ruling class. So that's a good one to check out if you want to learn more. But I thought I was kind of curious, just saying that political science is behavioral science. So maybe that's a little more insight into what they mean when they talk about political science. He's actually a behavioralist. He's actually conditioning and managing and molding the behavior of the populace. So a little bit about his life and education. In 1913, Pendleton Herring attended Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, and that made a lasting impression on him, and that's why he wanted to go into political science, right? He was just so moved and inspired and touched at the age of 10 by the president's inauguration that he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to this purpose, right? So it's quite a cutesy little origin story. He attended the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Johns Hopkins, of course, being the one of the main sponsors in Event 201 right before the Big C, and received his bachelor's degree in English in 1925. Snap, I got a bachelor's degree in English. But then 3 years later, he got his PhD, which is pretty fast going. I didn't know you could go from a bachelor straight to a PhD, but, this was 100 years ago. Times were a little different back then. He was taught constitutional law by Frank J. Goodenow, and that character, Frank Goodenow, was the first president of the American Political Science Association, the APSA. Then during his graduate, Pendleton Herring wrote a dissertation called Group Representation Before Congress, which studied the effects of pressure groups in government. So that stood out to me a little bit because I was thinking about groups, group identities, and how Alan Watt is often teaching us, like, you can't go along with a group because groups always get co-opted and steered. But of course, we get conditioned to identify with a group, to build our identity around belonging to groups, and this is just how divide and conquer is done, right? You're in my group, you're not in my group, and that's the defining thing about everybody you meet. We got a classic example of this going on right now. It's called the World Cup, and different people join different groups to support different teams of incredibly wealthy elite people who running around playing a game on a pitch, and they get really pent up and emotional and invested in this because they think they're part of a group, and they think that the success or the achievements of that team of very wealthy elite people running around playing a game is somehow representative of their nation or culture or history or something. I don't know. I don't get it. But that whole thing wouldn't be possible without group identity and group dynamics and the conditioning of individual human beings to believe they are part of a group. So Pendleton Herring's career He started at Harvard in the fall of 1928, so he would have been 25 years old. He was working at Harvard, and he began work in the government department of Harvard. And then in 1936, he was appointed secretary of Harvard's newly created Graduate School of Public Administration, where he helped develop its teaching programs. You find this again with this character. He's at the founding of a lot of different groups and organizations. He was just there at the beginning, right? Oh, they just create this new department. Pendleton Herring is there to oversee it, and the Graduate School of Public Administration. So this is just teaching people to be bureaucrats. This is just teaching people to be unproductive, to be part of the managerial class, cracking the whip, telling the slaves on the plantation who are actually doing the work what to do, and just presiding over them, and obviously getting a larger piece of the pie for the service of doing so, because they're just our servants, aren't they? These public servants. He wrote a bunch of books. None of them sounded that interesting, except his last one. So his final book was called "The Impact of War: Our Democracy Under Arms," and that was published in 1941. And this title, "Our Democracy Under Arms," the word "arms" stood out to me, and it reminded me of Clint Richardson. And he's got a book which is all about the legal fiction that we are attached to and we think is ourselves, and which leads to us acquiescing and giving our consent to be ruled over by this managerial elite class of bureaucrats. Okay, what he talks about, and that's relevant to this word "arms." He talks about I'm not very good at my politics and political documents, but I know over in America, you got the right to bear arms. And Clint Richardson explains that this isn't talking about weaponry and guns and machines for the purpose of self-defense. He says the right to bear arms is actually to do with your bloodline and your ancestry, and continuing that and keeping that private, and then keeping all the property and possessions and things you own privately held by your bloodline. And the link he makes is that each of these groups, these families that we look at, such as Bertrand Russell is a good example. They all have a coat of arms. They have a coat of arms, right? The coat of arms isn't typically anything to do with weaponry and warfare and fighting, right? So that was the link, and the interesting link that he made with that word "arms." So when I read the title of this book, "The Impact of War: Our American Democracy Under Arms," I'm thinking, I wonder if there's a deeper meaning of that title, meaning that our American democracy is under the arms, the bloodlines, the groups that have been exposed by many researchers. Dom Waterson of Sheep Farm in his excellent book Traitors, but there's other mainstream books written about the genealogies of American presidents, how most of them, if not all of them, are linked to British royal aristocracy, right? Maybe that was a little tongue-in-cheek, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nod sign to the people in the know of what he was really admitting. But of course, the exoteric, the average everyday person is going to think that's all about weaponry and military and warfare, you see? So arms, coat of arms, the right to bear arms, the fact that their bloodlines are so precious and important and protected, and our bloodlines are all mixed together, and really we're not encouraged to care about them so much or to know much deep history of our own bloodlines. We're encouraged to all mix and match and become mongrels and just mate freely according to our whims, whereas these groups, these bloodlines who are up above us in terms of the pyramidal hierarchy that we find ourselves born into, they are very careful. They are not mixing and matching. They are very cautious about who gets to breed with who, right? So, little tangent there, but hopefully that was interesting. Continuing with the Pendleton Herring's Wikipedia page, the impact of war, so this is the book, came to the attention of Ferdinand Eberstadt, who was a member of the War Production Board. And then the two of these, so Pendleton Herring and Ferdinand Eberstadt worked together to combine the military branches of the government under one administrative organization. And that was what gave birth to the National Security Act of 1947, which, as we already mentioned, created the National Security Council, the Department of Defense, and the Central Intelligence Agency. After this, Pendleton resigned from Harvard and went to work for Carnegie Corporation. It doesn't tell us anything about what he did there. Social Science Research Council. In 1948, Pendleton Herring became the president of the Social Science Research Council. He was there for 20 years. His goals were to increase the quality of research by taking better information and analyzing it with stricter methods, right? So more surveillance, more data gathering, more data collection. He wants to make this information available to policymakers to aid it in decision making. So these are the seeds of the present technocratic world that we are living in. You got to read Ian Davis's book, right? The Technocratic Dark State. This is all about making information available to policymakers to aid decision making and analyzing that information, right? That's what all the AI systems are for. That's what the internet itself is for, is to take in information on everybody at all times, which they give up voluntarily, which they pay you for. We pay for the privilege of giving all our information away to our enemies. Let that sink in. We pay for our internet connection. We buy the devices. We pay for subscriptions and memberships to various online data gathering operations, such as Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is. We are paying for that. They should be paying us for our data and information, but instead, things are so inverted that we're paying them to gather and harvest all our private data and information on us. It's crazy. It's kind of the same thing that I often point out with brands, people who love their branded clothing and whatever, sports cars and handbags. It's like, when you're advertising a company's brand, they should be paying you. But instead, you're paying them. You pay them for the Gucci handbag so that you can walk around advertising Gucci. You know, if Gucci wants to put up a billboard somewhere on a building or in a street or by a highway, Gucci has to pay for that advertising space. The company that wants to be advertised pays for the advertising space. But not us, not the sheeple, not the flocks, right? not the masses. We pay the company and then we go around and advertise for them. It's crazy. It's backwards. It's the same thing here. So Herring, he was early days, back in the 1940s. He was working on this problem. How do we get more information on people? How do we analyze it? And how do we make that information available to the policymakers so that we can improve their decision making, right? That's real corporate speech because it sounds good. Well, good. I hope the policymakers can have more information to aid their decision making. But that doesn't reveal anything about their intentions. It doesn't reveal anything about their purposes, their motivations, their goals, their what they want to do, right? What decisions are they making? And in whose benefit and in what way? Okay, it doesn't tell you that. It just vague corporate language. It doesn't tell you anything that you can hold them to. That's the whole point of it. During Pendleton's 20-year presidency at the Social Science Research Council, the budget was quadrupled from less than $500,000 to $2 million annually. And then his presidency drew many leading scholars there to serve, because the scholars are just servants. They're just serving you and they're serving me. And these leading scholars went to serve on the boards and the committees. Those boring, innocuous sounding boards and committees that rule our lives and make all the policy that throttles and stifles human freedom and creativity. In 1962, during his presidency, Pendleton Herring also, as if he wasn't busy enough, became the president of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. And in 1968, he retired from the SRC. Now, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, I think I'm right in saying he was the first president. Oh, that's the next section. It says, in 1968, Pendleton Herring became the president of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. As president of this foundation, he was active in persuading the Johnson administration and the Congress to create the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, which was built in Washington, D.C. Harrington served as the president for 30 years of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Now, of course, the Woodrow Wilson, he brought us the New Deal, and he was best buddies with Colonel Edward Mandell House, and Colonel Edward Mandell House wrote the book Philip Drew Administrator, and I'm starting to wonder if there's some connection between that book and this person, because I don't know if I've ever read a resume of an administrator par excellence quite like that of Pendleton Herring. 30 years president of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, and he got the administration, and he was critical in the founding and formation of the Central Intelligence Agency by way of the National Security Act. Right, he was played a key role in the methods by which the bureaucratic managerial elite gather information, analyze it on us in order to make inform their policy and decision making. He quadrupled the budget of the Social Science Research Council. He attracted leading scholars to serve these servants, just serving us all day long. Quite an astonishing career for a guy I'd never heard of, right? And so I thought as a jumping off point, is a good place to start our little preamble ramble. Hello, Heidi. I'm glad you are joining us live. And yes, a herring. Is he a herring? Is he a red herring? I found it interesting that he didn't have any picture on here and no information about his family. No mention of a wife. No mention of children. But you can find a couple of pictures of him online. Old fella, beard. And there is also a document I found, which is a speech that he gave. And that speech had an interesting title, although I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing. So let's have a look at what's going on here. Let's go to the next tab that I had prepared. So this is the Wilson Center, which Pendleton Herring persuaded Congress to build for the purposes of holding the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Now look at this building. Look at that. What a building. That is a building you put up to stand the test of time. It's not like these flimsy, ugly glass and metal monstrosities that they're whipping up in most of our city centers these days. That's a building for the people who do the long-term planning of our societies and the agendas that we live through, right? It's not half bad, actually. It's quite nice looking. That's Woodrow Wilson. But what stood out to me was this logo here. If you look at the Wilson Center logo there on the left, does it look familiar? Anybody in the chat want to say what that might remind them of, if anything? I'll give it a few seconds because I know there's a lag, and then I'll come back to it. The Wilson Center. The Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the WWICS, commonly known as the Wilson Center. It's in Washington, D.C., and it is a think tank dedicated to research and policy discussions on global issues. All right, so it's globalism, it's internationalism, it's setting us up very nicely for today's reading, which I'll remind people is Chapter 7, Foundation Impact on Foreign Policy. So it was established in 1968, and it describes itself. That just gave me a chuckle. Like yeah, we'll just take their word for it. It's a non-partisan think tank. Okay, even though it's dedicated to a named after a partisan president. The think tank itself, well, they tell us, they describe themselves as non-partisan, so they must be. You know, I always say, oh, we investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing. That old chestnut. So it's a non-partisan think tank. Okay, if you believe that. Yes, you got it. VW. That's it. Exactly. That's the logo. Look at it. It's literally the same logo. It's the same color. The only difference is there's no line right here where the V and the W. Isn't that amazing? And there's no circle around it. So, the Wilson Center. In 2020, the Think Tanks and Civil Societies program ranked it as the 10th most influential think tank worldwide. And yes, Frank points out that's the Brethren, Square, and Compass, right? There's the Masonic vibes that are included there. So the 10th most influential think tank in the world. And it researches international relations, security, economics, governance, and it makes reports and hosts discussions that shape policy debates. And I thought, so, you know, they tell you the truth, but then sometimes you have to sort of read between the words, as it were. And I just thought, they host discussions that shape policy, and that's where the full stop should be. But they actually put shape policy debates. We're just shaping the debates. We're just shaping the conversations about policy. But, you know, the method, that's called the Delphi technique, isn't it? When you shape a debate, you control a debate, and you have a predetermined outcome. But because you control the debate and you've got people in there raising points and challenging points, you manage it so that the predetermined conclusion is reached. So that's probably what they're into. There was some history here. DOGE, remember DOGE? The Department of Government Efficiency got their hands on it, and they scrapped a lot of people. 130 people got sacked back in 2025. So the organization of the Wilson Center, the center functions as a, drumroll please, public-private partnership, with approximately 1/3 of its operating funds provided through federal appropriation of the U.S. government. So that just means tax money, right? That means your tax money if you're an American taxpayer. The remainder money is from foundations, grants, contracts, corporations, individuals, wealthy individuals, presumably. So individuals are important because these will be the real individuals who aren't beholden to any sort of collective group mentality or thinking, right? Individually wealthy people, I suppose, or independently wealthy, maybe is what I'm trying to say there. And endowment income and subscriptions. So they've got a lot of money coming in from various places. The center is housed in the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. Wow, look at that. Look at that for a building. Whoa, look at that. Yeah. I think that's the same building, just from a different angle or another side or a different corner or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, quite amazing. I just need to pop out of this for a second and go back to the page we were just looking at. So it's housed in the Ronald Reagan Building, and guess what? It occupies a wing under a long-term rent-free lease arrangement. They're not even paying rent. They're not even paying rent. In November 2022, the Russian government labeled the center an undesirable organization under Russian law. And that prohibits its activities in the country. So this organization was active in Russia, we have to deduce from that. And Putin doesn't want them meddling in the Russian affairs, and so now they're undesirable. The administration of the Wilson Center, There's a board of trustees. The current chair is David Mansdorfer, and they're appointed to 6-year terms by the US president. The board of directors includes a bunch of people: Nick Adams, Daniel Abrahamson, Brittany Collins, Sean Sanders. RFK Jr. is on the board of directors, as well as Marco Rubio and Linda McMahon. Those are the names I've heard. The other ones I haven't, but I'm sure they would be interesting people to look into. Unfortunately, we only have so much time in the stream. The programs which Wilson Center is involved in include Cold War International History Project, Environmental Change and Security Program. So that's a good one. That might be a good one to look into, because like the environment is linked with security now. Ever since global climate warming change was rolled out, and we have to link environmental health and well-being into our security, and tie that up so that we can secure massive amounts of funding, so that we can continue to curtail your rights, freedoms, liberties, permissions, privileges, however you want to go at it. They're all being curtailed in the name of Mother Gaia and saving the environment, and the security threats that come along with eating steak and having children and going on holiday via plane. They're also working on history and public policy programs, so they're rewriting the history books and shaping the history that future generations of school indoctrination targets are given. And the Kissinger Institute is there as well. That's one we got to look into. Kissinger Institute on China and the United States, another nonprofit research organization, but they are being supported or funded, or I don't know, in some way, shape, or form, helped out by this Wilson group. And then also the North Korea International Documentation Project. Pretty interesting stuff. The 10th most influential think tank in the world. Same logo as Volkswagen. German Nazi car manufacturer. So I thought next we would look at the most recently appointed, I should say, president and chief exec, which is this lady, Natasha Jacome. I don't know how you say that. Natasha Jacome. Very friendly, nice looking lady. She's got one of those little, it looks like one of those extra piercings halfway up her ear. Very friendly looking. So, this is Natasha. She's the president and CEO of the Wilson Center. And you are going to find out absolutely jack shit about her from this bio that they've given us, because it's all corporate, vague, newspeak that says nothing. So Natasha is the president and the CEO of the Wilson Center. She works closely with the board of directors. She sets the center's vision for advancing impactful research and fostering partnerships to address pressing global challenges, ensuring the center fulfills its congressional mandate to be a bridge between the worlds of scholarship and policy. So it's a bridge. Bridges got to be built. Builders got to build, right? In more than a decade at the Wilson Center, Ms. Jacome has led transformative organizational growth, building bridges, building the capacity to succeed in a complex and competitive international policy landscape. She had led major initiatives to modernize operations, from enhancing engagement by respected scholars and staff to optimizing space and IT capabilities that strengthen the center's convening power. So modernizing operations and optimizing space and IT just means rolling out data gathering, surveillance software on all the people who work there. I think that's basically all it means. Windows 11, in other words. Based on her leadership at the Wilson Center, especially during the adaptations required in the post-pandemic period, and following the exec order restructuring, Ms. Jacome has become a respected leader in the think tank community. So there's a community of think tank people out there, and she's a respected leader. She has also represented the Wilson Center around the world at global forums like the Think Tank Talent for Future Gatherings. The Think Tank Talent for the Future, right? That's the name of it. That'd be one to look into as well. Think Tank Talent for the Future Gatherings in Dubai and Bahrain to discuss the future of policy research and innovation. Ms. Jacom earned her MS in management, specializing in finance. She did a BA in economics from the University of Maryland. A first-generation American. More on that in a second. Natasha is a passionate advocate for economic empowerment for herself and the people she serves, presumably, and financial literacy in underserved communities. She continues to leverage her platform to champion inclusive growth, strategic leadership, and long-term community-driven impact. Communitarianism. Communism, right? And these are the small, down and out, underserved, overlooked minority communities that she cares about, not everybody else. And she is a real human being because she likes running, swimming, and hanging out with a family. So that makes her relatable, and it just adds that extra dimension to all this corporate nonsense we just read about her. But I was like, a first generation American, what does that mean? I don't even know what that means. How can you be the first generation? So I had to look it up. And I just typed it into the Brave search here. And the automatic AI response that you can't turn off tells us that the term first generation American has two contradictory definitions depending on whether you are using official government statistics or colloquial language. So that's helpful, isn't it? So there's a U.S. Census Bureau definition, which means the first generation consists of individuals who are foreign born. So it means you're not American. That's what it means. A first generation American is not American. Under this framework, their US born children are considered the second generation. So it means you're not American. That's what it means. The colloquial definition in everyday conversation, media, and college applications refers to first generation individuals born in the United States to at least one foreign born parent. Right. So you're half American. Right. So that's what first generation American means. It either means she's not American or she's half American. Because it's just a big melting pot. There are no races. There are no nationalities. We are all global citizens at this point. We are all workers and drones in the global beehive serving the builders and the administrators, who in turn serve the elite. And that's where we're at. So there you are. That's the Wilson Center, an offshoot of the Volkswagen Nazi car production company, with its president and CEO, who's not even American, sitting at the helm, building bridges, and leading the way in the world's think tank community. And that is it for our preamble today. I had so many other tabs open, but I just didn't get around to properly reading and reviewing them, and so I can bring them up in the preamble. But it's probably for the best because we were already an hour and a half and we haven't even started the reading yet. So I will remind people, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If at any point you feel so moved to support, I would appreciate it. You can do so by buying me a coffee, donating via PayPal. But the best way to do it is to sign up, follow the various channels, share the videos around, get onto my mailing list by downloading the Continuity of Control email series or signing up for the Ultimate Reading List. And you can do that at those websites on the screen there. These I'm really proud of these resources, and they're free. And I think anybody who trusts me will benefit from them because there's a lot of good information packed in there a lot of grist for the mill for those self-directed learners who like to follow their curiosity to learn more about the world and the way it works. And they're both up there now. ultimatereadinglist.com, continuityofcontrol.com. Check it out. And I've also got on here allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. You can download my guitar music bundle. That's 4 hours of original guitar ditties. You know, whatever. I don't know why you would want to, but they're there in case you do want them. And some of them are nice. Some of them they're all badly recorded on an iPhone. So don't be expecting too much if you take the plunge and download that particular bundle. But yeah, they're good background music if you want to like do some sketching, or maybe if you want to read a book, you could put them on in the background, right? Because there's no lyrics, so there's nothing that's going to distract your language processing part of your mind while you're reading a book. So there you are. Maybe I should market that as background reading music. Yeah, that might be something I'll do. So allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Appreciate your support. Appreciate you being here for the live, being here for the replay in whatever way, shape, or form you are here. I appreciate you. So thanks. Let's get into the book reading now after I have a sip of coffee and just quickly check the comments. We got a few over on YouTube. Nothing on Rumble and Odyssey, which is all good. Nothing on Entropy, all good. So on YouTube, Heidi was saying, I feel so fortunate to understand this vile bureaucracy. If only more people could. I like that term, vile bureaucracy. Nice. That's a good way of putting it. Frank says, notice her body language of crossed arms. Yes, this was the lady we were just looking at there. She's got crossed arms, and she's looking very happy and pleased and proud to be doing probably absolutely nothing for the vast amounts of money she gets paid. Heidi says, think tank community, puke emoji, puke emoji, puke emoji. What a load of crap. Yeah, again, well said. Well said. All right. Let's get into today's book. So we just learned about a think tank, which is very interested in global problems and foreign problems and building bridges with scholars and policymakers. And the chapter we're going to be reading today, if we go over to the book cam, is here, Foundation, Impact on Foreign Policy. Let's push that wire out the way, and I want to get comfortable because sometimes I get into the reading and I end up having a painful neck because I haven't arranged the book and the camera and the microphone in a place that's actually comfortable for me. I'm going to get my pencil. All right, so let's get into it. So remember, at any time, drop questions or comments in the chats. I'm trying to monitor all the chats, but I actually forgot to do the pop-out chat thing where I can look at them all at once. So the main chat I'm observing at the moment is YouTube. If you want to drop a comment or say anything, you can do so on YouTube. It's the best place. I will catch it. So this is Chapter 7, Foundation Impact on Foreign Policy. The Foundation Complex in, quote, internationalism. It's funny they put it in inverted commas there, right? Worms has put internationalism, like it's not implying that, you know, it's not what we think it is or that it's not a real thing. Foundation activity has nowhere had a greater impact than in the field of foreign affairs. I love, I love English grammar. Foundation activity has nowhere had a greater impact. Oh, I just had flashbacks to my days as an English teacher, trying to help people wrestle with, you know, past perfect tense. And that's a great example that would blow the minds of my students, because a lot of other languages, they just have very simple grammar when it comes to indicating tenses, you know, past and future. They'll just keep the verb the same, but they'll add another word that means future, or they'll add another word that means past. Kind of like we do when we say, I will read a book, right? We change the verb for I read a book, I'm reading a book, but for the future, we just add the word will. I will read. And other languages do that for past as well, like I did read a book, you know. So, but we got all these funny, quirky exceptions and rules that are hard to follow, and That's a good example. Foundation activity has nowhere had. Good stuff. So I'll start again. Foundation activity has nowhere had a greater impact than in the field of foreign affairs, right? So this is the number one primary domain which Wormser is telling us this foundation activity is influencing. It has conquered public opinion and has largely established the international political goals of our country. A few major foundations with internationalist tendencies created or fostered a varied group of organizations which now dominate the research, the education, and the supply of experts in the field. Among such instruments are the Council on Foreign Relations, the Foreign Policy Association, the Institute of Pacific Relations, the United Nations Association, and the conferences and seminars held by American universities on international relations and allied subjects. It would be difficult to find a single foundation-supported organization of any substance which has not favored the United Nations or similar global schemes. Fantastically heavy foreign aid at the burdensome expense of the taxpayer, meddling in the colonial affairs of other nations, and American military commitments over the globe. Though the sums of money put up by the internationalist-minded foundations may seem relatively small in comparison with larger grants spent elsewhere, they have enabled their satellite or subsidized organizations to play a conspicuous and dominating role. This was comparatively easy to accomplish because there was no organized or foundation-supported opposition. There you go. See, so there's no foundation-supported opposition. It's one-sided. They're not being impartial. They're not being objective. They're not supporting and fostering an honest battle between ideas and differing sides. It's heavily, overwhelmingly leftist, collectivist, globalist, internationalist in terms of the output of what these foundations were supporting and funding. The influence of the foundation complex in internationalism has reached far into government, into the policymaking circles of Congress, and into the State Department. This has been effected through the pressure of public opinion mobilized by the instruments of the foundations, through the promotion of foundation favorites as teachers and experts in foreign affairs, through a domination of the learned journals in international affairs, through the frequent appointment of State Department officials to foundation jobs, and through the frequent appointment of foundation officials to State Department jobs. Right, so the reverse. Yeah, so you got that revolving door, right? The State Department officials are going to the foundations, and the foundation officials are going to the State Department. And they're just bouncing from one to the other. Like, for example, that woman we just looked at there with her arms crossed, Natasha Jacome, it doesn't tell us anything about what she did before she joined the Volkswagen Wilson Center, right? That's why I told you that this bio. I mean, this is the president and CEO, and it tells you zero about her and her background and her possible affiliations and history and why she's not even what's the meaning of this ambiguous phrase first generation American, right? Oh, but she likes running and swimming and she's got a family, so she must be cool. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that she had a State Department job, is what I'm saying. Okay. At least one foreign foundation has had a strong influence on our foreign policy. The Rhodes Scholarship Fund of Great Britain, created to improve England's international public relations, but not registered here as a foreign agent, has gained great influence in the United States for British ideas. It has accomplished this by annually selecting a choice group of promising young men for study in England. The usually Anglophile alumni of the system are to be found in eminent positions in legislation, administration, and education, and in the ranks of American Foundation officials. They form a patronage network of considerable importance. Dr. Frank Idolet Idalot, in a book, The Rhodes Trust 1903 to 1953, published in 1956, reported, quote, "The influence of this group on American educational practice, and particularly on the rapidly increasing maturity and breadth of methods of instruction in American institutions of higher learning, has been immense." He continued, quote, "The number of those going into government is constantly increasing." So there is a book to look up or to look out for. Of a total of 1,372 American Rhodes Scholars up to 1953, 431 held or hold positions in teaching and educational administration, among them 31 college presidents. 113 held government positions, 70 held positions in press and radio, and 14 were executives in other foundations. Dr. Idalot remarks, quote, "One indication of the successive operations of the Rhodes Scholarships in America is the remarkable way in which they have inspired other foundations." He reports that the Guggenheim Fellowships and the program of the Commonwealth Fund set up by Mr. Harkness and several similar programs were developed with the aid of officials of the Rhodes Fund. Dean Rusk, president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and several of the staff members of that foundation are Rhodes Scholars. Mr. Henry Allen Moe, the director of the Guggenheim Foundation, and O.C. Carmichael, former president of the Carnegie Foundation, are Rhodes Scholars. Senator J.W. Fulbright, Congressman C.R. Klassen, R. Hale, and C.B. Albert, and 14 American state legislators are also Rhodes alumni. Among the many Rhodes Scholars connected with our Department of State are these: Ambassador to the Netherlands S.K. Hornbeck, formerly Chief of Far Eastern Affairs in the Department; B.M. Hull, formerly Chief of North European Affairs in the Department; W. Walter Butterworth, former Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern Affairs, U.S. Ambassador to Sweden, Deputy Chief, U.S. Mission to London; Walter Gordon, U.S. Embassy in London, in charge of economic affairs with the rank of Minister; and G.C. McGee, Ambassador to Turkey. That's just a funny name. G.C. McGee. Before becoming president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Dean Rusk served as a Deputy Undersecretary of State. Dr. Idalot reports that, in addition, 12 Rhodes Scholars were attached to various intergovernmental agencies, ILO, UN, etc. It may not be merely coincidental to this subject that Cecil Rhodes, who created the scholarships, and Andrew Carnegie were friends. The latter may have learned from the former the technique of accomplishing great effects with relatively modest means. Carnegie contributed but a small part of his wealth to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, yet this comparatively small unit grew to have gigantic influence on American foreign affairs. Yes, thank you. We got a comment on YouTube. From Nick O'Dono says, Bill Clinton is another classic Rhodes Scholar. Yes, you're right. And also Bill Clinton was mentored by Carroll Quigley, right, who wrote Tragedy and Hope and The Anglo-American Establishment, as I mentioned in the intro. Just as there have been interlocks and a concentration of power in education and in social science research in domestic areas, there has been a similar combination in the field of foreign policy. The major components of the concentration in internationalism have been the Carnegie Corporation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Rockefeller Foundation, and, recently, the Ford Foundation. I've mentioned some of their more important satellites. Then there are the conferences. One of the most important activities of the foundations and associated groups operating in the international field consists of promoting conference after conference and forum after forum for the discussion of international affairs. These would serve a useful purpose were it not for the fact that they are almost invariably made into platforms for the special points of view which these groups favor. And I'll kind kind of pause there for a second to mention, like, just to back up that point he just made. These conferences, as an example, I've got 5 of these, but I'll just show you 2. So this is a book called The British Commonwealth Relations Proceedings of the First Unofficial Conference at Toronto on the 11th of September 1933. So if you like your numerology, you can get into that one. This is edited by Arnold J. Toynbee with a foreword by the Right Honourable Sir Robert L. Borden, GCMG. And this is just an example. This is an example of the kind of conference that Worms is talking about here in Foundations, and this was the first one held in 1933. But that book was published in 1934. Now, there's also this one. This is The British Commonwealth in the Future. This is proceedings of the second unofficial conference of British Commonwealth Relations, Sydney. It didn't start on the 11th of September, but it did happen around the same 11th of September again, from the 3rd to the 17th. This is edited by H.V. Hodson with a foreword by the Honourable Sir Thomas Bavin, KCMG, KC. It's 1939. Again, another conference. And I actually have books from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Commonwealth Conference. So that's just to let you know there that, as if you needed reminding at this point, that Worms knows his shit. Like, he does. He's not making stuff up. This is very good research that he's put together in this book for us. We're very blessed to have a copy and to be able to read it. But yeah, there's an example. These Commonwealth conferences, they're unofficial. Oh yeah, they're unofficial. So it's kind of like the Bilderberg meetings or the World Economic Forum. They just get together and, we're just talking about how we can serve the rest of humanity because we're just servants, right? So the conferences. A common character of the meetings frequently held all over the country under the auspices of or in cooperation with the organs of the internationalist foundations, is that they regularly present speakers favorable to the sentiments of these supporters. The speakers almost invariably and ad nauseam advocate aid for underdeveloped countries with no strings attached. Quote, that's in quotes, with no strings attached. Yeah, wink, wink. Distribution of American foreign aid through the United Nations rather than through American agencies. Recognition of Communist China. Membership for Communist China in the United Nations. American abandonment of atomic weapons without guarantees for similar disarmament by our enemy. Through their virtually monopolistic control of the marketplace for ideas in the area of international relations, these organizations exert an influence far beyond the weight of the general followers of liberal politics. Their opponents enjoy little or no financial support. Thus, the intensity of the internationalist campaign produces propaganda returns even among businessmen and groups which would ordinarily, without the blasting of such propaganda, be inclined to a more conservative point of view. Excuse me. For example, the National Review of March the 7th, 1956 called attention to the fact that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had been among the sponsors of a recent Midwest residential seminar on world affairs held near St. Louis. It was in strange company. Among the other supporting organizations were the American Labor Education Service, so that's the ALES that Pendleton Herring was part of, the American Association for the United Nations, the Social Science Foundation, the Institute of International Relations, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the American Library Association, the Foreign Policy Association, and the American Foundation for Political Education. The featured speaker at this seminar was John Carter Vincent, discharged from the State Department as a loyalty risk. And you see, those of you watching the video, that sentence, that last sentence there, he's actually italicized, which is unusual for this book. He doesn't italicize a lot, unless he's adding emphasis to a quote, right? This John Carter Vincent, probably somebody worth learning about. So this next section is the part of the Carnegie Endowment. When Andrew Carnegie established the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, he gave the managers of this fund a difficult task. How were they to go about promoting peace? They seem to have had no very clear idea until Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, in whose hands Mr. Carnegie put the initial direction of the fund, got excited about the peril of the Allies in World War I and decided that the best way to establish peace was to help get the United States into the war. To this end, he began to use the endowment funds. Do you know what this reminds me of? Excuse me, it reminds me of earlier in the year when Israel and America started attacking Iran, and there was a spokesperson from the US, I don't know, government, I don't know what role or branch of government he was from, but he said the reason we had to strike Iran was because we knew that Israel was going to strike Iran, and that would cause Iran to strike us. And so to make sure Iran didn't strike us because of Israel striking Iran, we had to strike Iran first. It's the same sort of stuff, right? If we want to establish peace, we're going to have to go to war. And if we want to establish virginity, we're all going to have to start screwing, right? It's incredible. So continuing. When the war was ended, that issue was gone. Support for the League of Nations gave the endowment one new outlet for its energies and its funds, but more scope than this was needed for the propaganda machine which it had become. A fruitful guide for operations was found in Dr. Butler's personal shibboleth of the international mind, a phrase to which he was devoted in speeches and writings. Oh, right. Okay, so this is someone we got to look up. Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler has been using this phrase, the international mind. So that's like the collectivist hive mind of the planet. I mean, he might not have been thinking in terms of Star Trek and the Borg, but that's a similar kind of concept, right? Continuing, the concept of the international mind had considerable value. Americans generally in Dr. Butler's day were not as well informed in international affairs as might be desirable. Efforts to educate them were commendable enough. But Dr. Butler went further than a mere desire to give us a better international education. He seemed to have had an idea that if only Americans got more international-minded, the cause of peace would be promoted. Perhaps this is an exaggeration, as I stated, but there is no question that Dr. Butler was somewhat possessed of the concept of international mindedness. At any rate, a powerful propaganda machine came into being. Used objectively, it could have been of enormous service to the country, but, as is likely to be the case, it turned to advocacy. When you control a propaganda vehicle, it is tempting to use it to promote your own program. The Reese Committee said of the endowment's work, an extremely powerful propaganda machine was created. It spent many millions of dollars in the production of masses of material for distribution, the creation and support of large numbers of international policy clubs and other local organizations at colleges and elsewhere, the underwriting and dissemination of many books on various subjects through the international mind alcoves and the international relations clubs and centers which it organized all over the country, the collaboration with agents of publicity such as newspaper editors, the preparation of material to be used in school textbooks, and cooperation with publishers of textbooks to incorporate this material, the establishing of professorships at the colleges and the training and indoctrination of teachers, the financing of lecturers, and the importation of foreign lecturers and exchange professors, the support of outside agencies touching the international field, such as the Institute of International Education, the Foreign Policy Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Council on Education, the American Council of Learned Societies, the American Historical Association, the American Association of International Conciliation, the Institute of Pacific Relations, the International Parliamentary Union, and others, and acting as midwife at the birth of some of them. That's from the Reese Committee Report, page 171. The Carnegie Endowment was utterly frank in disclosing its propaganda function. It used terms frequently, such as the education of public opinion. This is not public education, but molding public opinion, right? So remember in the intro, I was asking that question, when does education become propaganda, right? What's the difference? How do you draw the line between the two? Is there a difference? These kind of questions, very important to think about and reflect on, especially if you've been through schooling or you know people currently going through schooling, or if you plan to put some little person under your care through schooling as well. Important to know or to think about. Continuing. The committee report indicated that one thing seemed utterly clear. No private group should have the power or the right to decide what should be read and taught in our schools and colleges. Yet, this is what the endowment sought to do in educating public opinion. The influence of this foundation may be illustrated by the functions held by its former president, Alger Hiss. There's a name we have come across before. And what a last name, Hiss, like a snake. He was a trustee of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Remember our preamble, we looked at Pendleton Herring. He was the 30-year president of that particular foundation. Alger Hiss was also a director of the Executive Committee of the American Association for the United Nations, a director of the American Peace Society, a trustee of the World Peace Federation, and a director of the American Institute of Pacific Relations. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace made its position clear. Its 1934 yearbook complained about the economic nationalism which is still running riot and which is the greatest obstacle to the re-establishment of prosperity and genuine peace, and referred to nationalism as, quote, this violently reactionary movement. Nationalism is held to be violently reactionary in the United States, but the organizations supported by the endowment apparently feel that nationalism abroad is a fine thing. Okay, this is good. I've come across this idea many times and mentioned it many times in our live streams. There's good nationalism and bad nationalism. Yeah, if you're in the West and you're nationalistic, that's bad nationalism. But if people come to your country from other countries that are totally different in culturally, in terms of language, in terms of religious belief, values, norms, everything, then their nationalism is good nationalism as long as it's practiced in your country as a minority. But if you take yourself off to another country and practice your nationalism, that's bad. That's colonialism. That's empire building, right? It's a terrible thing for you to do that. But for non-white people to come over here and practice their nationalism, that's a really good version of nationalism. So totally logical and fair and equitable and sensible way of viewing nationalism there. But it's interesting to read it here back in 1958, okay? I'll read it again because it's very important to understand this contradiction in what we are told. Because this is how, by identifying contradictions in the mainstream narratives, that's how you crack them apart and dismiss them as arbitrary and stupid bullshit, for lack of a better term. So, this is page 206, Foundation's Impact on Foreign Policy. Nationalism is held to be violently reactionary in the United States, but the organizations supported by the endowment apparently feel that nationalism abroad is a fine thing. It depends who's being nationalistic. Under the slogan of anti-colonialism, they have supported rabid nationalistic movements, often communist-stimulated in undeveloped areas, and have underwritten measures abroad highly detrimental to American prestige and American private investments. The 1946 report of the Rockefeller Foundation also minced no words in advocating globalism. It read, quote, "The challenge of the future is to make this world one world, a world truly free to engage in common and constructive intellectual efforts that will serve the welfare of mankind everywhere. Wow. So that's the 1946 report of the Rockefeller Foundation. Incredibly important quote there. I never read that one before, I don't think. And then, that echoes, that was repeated again by David Rockefeller in his memoirs from the early 2000s. That was 2003, 2004, I think, where he said, we are internationalists trying to make part of an international cabal working against the interests of the United States, trying to build a more integrated world, one world, if you will. And if that is the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. That's what he said. So, 1946, there's the golden thread there, and right through to David Rockefeller's memoirs in the early 2000s. So continuing with our reading now. The ideal of a united world as a basis for permanent peace is a splendid one, but the executives of the international-minded foundations have committed two serious errors in promoting it. One is that they have been in too great haste to translate into immediate action an ideal which might take another century of extremely careful planning and adjustment to accomplish. The other has been that the common world which they have envisioned and to which they have sought to rush us is unquestionably an extended international collectivism. Okay, so that is another important quote. I knew this was going to be a good chapter. It ties so much together. From Carol Quigley to Cecil Rhodes to the Rhodes Foundations, the Roundtable groups, the World War I conspiracy documentary by James Corbett, and the book that is based on, which is called Hidden History by Jerry and Doherty. Sorry, McGregor and Doherty, and they've done another two books together, or at least one. They've done one other book together, and then McGregor's done a third book that's prolonging the agony. And then the third book is Two World Wars and Hitler. It ties in the robber barons, right? Your industrialists, the Standard Oil of the Rockefellers, the establishment of the foundations, of course, which this book's about. But it ties it into all that stuff, then into the internationalism. And of course, none of this could happen without money and without funding and without the ability to just print Federal Reserve notes out of nothing whenever you want to and force everybody else to use it and imprison them if they make their own currency and call that counterfeit, right? It ties so much together. What a fantastic book, and what a wonderful chapter. And we've still got quite a bit to go, so I will continue now. The Rees Committee came to this conclusion, quote, "The weight of evidence before this committee, which the foundations have made no serious effort to rebut, indicates that the form of globalism which the foundations have so actively promoted, and from which our foreign policy has suffered seriously, relates definitely to a collectivist point of view. Despite vehement disclaimers of bias, despite platitudinous affirmations of loyalty to American traditions, the statements filed by those foundations whose operations touch on foreign policy have produced no rebuttal to the evidence of support of collectivism." That's from the Rees Committee hearings. The report page is page 169. In an affidavit filed with the Rees Committee, Dr. Felix Whitmer, former associate professor of the social studies at the New Jersey State Teachers College, described his experiences as the advisor to one of the international relations clubs founded by the Carnegie Endowment. Dr. Whitmer said that there were about 1,000 of these clubs, and that, as a result of association with them, a great proportion of the student members had acquired strongly leftist tendencies. At regional conferences, said Dr. Whitmer, a large majority of those students who attended favored views which came close to that of the Kremlin. Speakers were provided by the Carnegie Endowment. Among the speakers supplied to the club at New Jersey Teachers College was Alger Hiss. When Dr. Whitmer protested against receiving Hiss as a speaker, the secretary of the endowment said Dr. Whitmer reminded him, quote, in no uncertain terms that our club, like all the hundreds of other clubs, was under the direction of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which had for years liberally supplied it with reading material and which contributed funds to cover the honoraria of conference speakers. Radical infiltration in the club of which Dr. Whitmer was advisor became so pronounced that he resigned his position. Good on you, Dr. Whitmer. Well played, sir. Always nice to see somebody with a conscience and a bit of moral rectitude and a spine and a backbone. So the next section here is the Foreign Policy Association. Among the literature distributed by the Carnegie Endowment were some produced by the Foreign Policy Association, which it heavily supported. The research director of this organization for years was Vera Michels Dean. A staff report to the Reese Committee made this comment upon Mrs. Dean. Reference has already been made to Mrs. Dean, who, according to the New York Times a few years ago, made a plea for socialism to 600 alumni at Vassar College, saying our quarrel with communism must not be over its ends, but over its methods, and urging a foreign policy backing socialist programs. Speaking of her book, Europe and the U.S., in the book review section of the New York Herald Tribune on May the 7th, 1950, Harry Baer, an editorial writer for that paper, wrote, quote, in other words, she considers it possible that the world may not be divided on sharp ideological lines, but that there may yet be at least economic exchanges which will temper the world's struggle, and by reducing the disparity in standards of living between Eastern and Western Europe, gradually abolish the conditions which foster communism and maintain it is a dangerous, inhumane tyranny in those nations which now profess the Stalinist creed. That's from the Reese Committee hearings, page 901. Among the Foreign Policy Association's products were the headline books. One of these, World of the Great Powers, was written by Max Lerner, a leftist, who, conceding that there are undoubtedly valuable elements in the capitalist economic organizations, proceeded to tell the readers to whom the Carnegie Endowment circulated his work that, quote, if democracy is to survive, it too must move towards socialism. It is the only principle that can organize the restless energies of the world's peoples. The Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations, another member of the international complex, financed both by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations, overwhelmingly propagandizes the globalist concept. This organization became virtually an agency of the government when World War II broke out. The Rockefeller Foundation had started and financed certain studies known as the War and Peace Studies, manned largely by associates of the Council. The State Department in due course took these studies over, retaining the major personnel which the Council on Foreign Relations had supplied. Heidi says, this book is a historical treasure. I agree. Frank says, it's fascinatingly amazing to note the usual suspect monsters, e.g. Algar Hiss, to float to the surface of so many books such as this. And then Heidi says, scum floats, Frank. And then Nicodono says, you mentioned Arnold Toynbee earlier, the author of one of those Commonwealth books. If you want more explicit quotes like that Rockefeller Foundation statement, I would read his books. I thank you very much for that. Yeah, there was Arnold Toynbee, and there was also his uncle. There was like a junior and a senior, wasn't there? And these fellows were sort of tasked with being the official historians who would write the history as they wanted it to be written, to be spread, no doubt, through the textbooks in the schools by way of the foundation-funded education, quote-unquote education, which is just schooling, which is just indoctrination, which is just propaganda. But yeah, I appreciate that. And I have not read any of Arnold Toynbee's books, so thank you for the reminder to do so. All right, next section here is the historical blackout. One of the propaganda objectives of the Council on Foreign Relations was promotion of the historical blackout. The 1946 report of the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the supporters of the Council, contained this. The Committee on Studies of the Council on Foreign Relations is concerned that the debunking journalistic campaign following World War I should not be repeated, and believes that the American public deserves a clear and competent statement of our basic aims and activities during the Second World War. Okay. I haven't heard of this historical blackout before, but it sounds like what they're saying here. The debunking journalistic campaign following World War I. It sounds like they're saying we need to have a very strong grip on the narrative of World War II. But to continue, Worms's commentary says, this statement deserves pause. It has obvious political intention. It cannot be considered objective. Several eminent historians have written books critical of much of the government position in World War I. And again, this is another sentence that's italicized for emphasis. It is nothing short of reprehensible for a tax-exempt organization to smear such critical historians with the term debunking journalism. There you are. See, they're talking about narrative control. They want to get their men in the positions where, such as Arnold Toynbee, good example. They want to get their writers, the authorized experts, and the approved historians to be in the positions, to be in the ones who are telling the story of what's going on and what happened. These days, that's taken care of by the podcast industrial complex, right? It's podcasters who do that now in real time. And but back in those days, prior to the internet, it was authors and writers and experts and historians writing in journals, writing pamphlets, publishing books. This was the way it had to be done. So continuing, the plan called for a 3-volume history of World War II in which there was to be no debunking. Note that this clearly was to be no objective study. The official propaganda of World War II was to be perpetuated. As Professor Charles Austin Beard put it, quote, in short, they hope that, among other things, the policies and measures of FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, will escape in the coming years the critical analysis, evaluation, and exposition that befell the policies and measures of Woodrow Wilson and the Entente allies after World War I. Professor Harry Elmer Barnes, in The Historical Blackout and Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace, described what amounted to a conspiracy to prevent the American people from learning the truth. This conspiracy was Foundation supported. The Rockefeller Foundation allotted $139,000 to the production of the 3-volume history, which was to debar, quote, debunking. This is the same Rockefeller Foundation whose current president has, in 2 recent addresses, proclaimed its insistence on continuing to support controversy. Right, so this is reminding me. Recently, I've been listening to quite a few interviews and talks with Michael Hoffman, and he has a website. His website is literally revisionisthistory.org, revisionisthistory.org, and he's written 6 books, I think. Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare is one of them. I heard him on a talk discussing his book, Adolf Hitler, Enemy of the German People. That's the title of his book. And Michael Hoffman makes a very good case that history should be open to being revised, right? We know the well-worn, oft-repeated saying, adage, maxim, that history is written by the victors. And the word itself is his story, right? His story. And so we've got to be open to recognizing that we have been fooled. We've been sold a bag of bullshit when it comes to how things went down in the past. And that careful, diligent, scholarly investigation, following evidence wherever it leads, is the narrow path to getting closer to truth, right? And these sort of cartoonish, oversimplified good versus evil narratives are very convenient and easy, and they feel good, but it's not the way it works, and it's not the way it happened. History is nuanced, it's complicated, it's vague. And I always say, people can't even remember what happened to them 5 years ago during the Big C event. So what chance do we really have of understanding what happened 105 years ago? Okay? So this is why the books are so important, because our memories are liable to error, prone to fault, especially in this era of screens and digital information and short attention spans and all the other stuff that comes with that. So you got to be open to revising your history and what you think you know about the past, and really don't assume anything. Don't take anything for granted. You have to allow your sacred cows to be questioned and interrogated and poked and prodded. Okay, and that's sort of sounds like what this section of the book's touching on, is that the Rockefellers, via their foundation, want to establish this narrative. This is the narrative. This is how it happened, and this is very interesting that they talk about World War II as the example where this was going to be done, because there is so much smoke and fog of war around World War II and what actually happened, and who did what to whom, and how many of whom had something done to them. And okay, these questions are up in the air. But World War II has the distinct privileged position of being the only history that you cannot question, because if you do, you will go to prison, right? Certain aspects of World War II, that is. So very curious and very interesting that situation, that time, that period, that event has to have that legal protection. Whereas atrocities of greater magnitude can be openly and freely questioned, doubted, disbelieved, ignored. What's the word though? Denied, right? You can deny any historical atrocity apart from that one in World War II. And then if you try and deny that one, then it's a big problem. People literally have gone to prison and are still in prison for questioning that event, right? So strange, very, very strange. Why is that the only atrocity when there are bigger, more severe, horrific atrocities out there that you are allowed to deny? It's very, this control of history was best articulated to us by Orwell in 1984. Control the past, control the present. No, control the present, control the past, control the future. I think I got that right. But, this is why you got to memory hold certain things. This is why Winston Smith's job is to Tipex names and characters out of the official records and pop them into those pneumatic tubes where they become official truth. And that is what the foundations are trying to do here, right? We got Boy Howdy in the chat who says, I do enjoy the truth. Well, me too. And I think you got to develop a certain intuition for the truth. You have to develop a certain ability to detect what Crow 777 calls the ring of truth. And, you got to be skeptical and open-minded in equal measures. You don't want to fall for oversimplistic nonsense narratives. You got to be willing to do kind of boring, painstaking things, such as reading long, complicated, hard books, right? That's the example that I'm trying to set on the channel. Poor Ursula Haverbeck, says Boy Howdy. So, yeah, good to have you here. Thank you for leaving a comment. I appreciate it. Frank says, today's historical blackout in the making, censorship of social media and citizen journalists, etc. Yes, exactly. So we were told you have freedom of speech, but not of reach, right? So you can get onto your channel, you can run your account, blog, make your posts, do your tweets, but that doesn't mean you're going to reach anybody. You're free to do that. You're free to scream into the abyss of the internet. But it doesn't mean we're going to let anybody just happen upon your work by way of algorithms, right? So there's a censorship layer to this digital infrastructure. It's best off, I suppose, thought of as a filter. It's kind of a filter. It lets certain voices get through and get amplified, and certain others don't. And by this method, it gives us the illusion of this open battleground of ideas, this marketplace for ideas that Wormser talks about in the book here. But that's just an illusion, because actually what can and cannot be said on these platforms is very closely, tightly regulated and controlled, with certain voices and opinions and viewpoints getting amplified, and lots of exposure and lots of likes and clicks and comments and shares that could all be bots. Could all be bots. We don't know how many of these faceless, nameless accounts online we interact with are actually human beings on the other side of it, and how many of them are just very well-trained, constantly improving GPT/AI, quote-unquote, agents. And this is the word that they use for them. They literally use AI agents, right? I'm getting, because they think I'm a business owner, because I have a YouTube channel, I get a lot of ads for business owners. And, are you trying to sell courses? Are you trying to close deals and sales training and, make £10,000 a month publishing anonymous books to Amazon that you can get AI to write for you, and this kind of stuff? I get it all the time now. But one of the ones that I'm seeing now, and this is, I believe, has been advertised on the London Underground as well, is get AI agents to do all the boring stuff that you don't want to do in your business. So they can answer the phones, they can respond to text messages, they can respond to emails. These AI agents, they literally are called agents. Think of Agent Smith, undercover agents. Think of the loss of agency that we have when we hand over things that we can do, we should do, that might be hard for us to do, but nevertheless we would grow and gain strength and skills and experience through trying to do those hard things. All these things, we are farming it out to AI agents, and with every use of such technology, we lose our own humanity. We lose our own ability to do those things ourselves. But they literally called them agents. I thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, agents coming to a business near you very soon, if not already. You could already be interacting with agents when you contact customer services. I know some of the dead, hollow, soulless voices that I've encountered on the other end of these phone calls to customer services suggest to me that maybe we are already in the era of AI agents. And yes, thank you. Justin Burns says change agents as well. That's another good one too. DD of A. I'm not sure what that means. DD of A. Something of America? I don't know. Right. Let's get back to the book. We still got a bit to do. See, are we going to finish this chapter today? I think we are. Yes, we're going to finish this chapter today. So let's crack on. Where did I even get to? Oh yeah, here we go. So this next section, is the Institute of Pacific Relations. I have discussed this catastrophic... Hang on, sorry, I gotta have a sip after that tangential rant. I like these morning broadcasts. I'm a bit more alert. I'm a bit more awake. I'm a bit more caffeinated. I think that helps. I don't think we'll get as many people watching live because a lot of people over in the States are should be in bed by now. You should way past your bedtime. But yeah, I'm quite enjoying the morning energy. It mixes quite nicely with the live stream, I think. But let me know your thoughts. Leave me some feedback. And the email address is at the top of the screen right now. It's floating across my head, nick@hayesreviews.com. If you want to get in touch for any reason. I like hearing from people with your feedback, suggestions, recommendations, further avenues for research, things that I've missed, things that I got wrong. I'm not trying to be an authority. I'm not an expert. I'm not trying to say, trust me, bro, I got it all figured out. The whole purpose, point, and pursuit. There you go. There's a nice little bit of alliteration for you there. The whole purpose, point, and pursuit of this channel is to just show that really we can all go to learn this stuff, and we don't have to trust our favorite talking head on the internet somewhere who may or may not be slipping us a little poison with the information. Okay. Disinformation, misinformation. It's out there. The podcast industrial complex is a real thing. That is the new forum for propaganda delivery mechanism. So what I want to do is sort of say, look, I don't have all the answers. Let's look in the books. Let's read the books and kind of try and figure it out in real time together on the show. But if I can encourage other people to start their own channels and buy a book cam and do something similar, then please do. There's only so many books. I'll probably die before I can read all the books in my library. It's sad to say, but it's probably true. Unless I get more donations and I can quit my job and do this full time. So if you want to help me read all my books in my library before I die, please consider sending me some monetary support so I can get out of my day job. All right, that's my pitch. Oh, okay, Justin Burns, DD of A, Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry I didn't catch that. I should have got it. But yeah, DD of A, Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Charlotte Isabete. Change Agents. Good stuff. Heidi says, my local library wouldn't put nutritional healing books I offered to donate into circulation. Gatekeeperism is rampant throughout our communities, not only in the press and academia. Yeah, sadly true. Local councils, this absolute humiliation ritual I have to go through just to get a slightly larger bin for my house shows you the gatekeeperism is very real, and those who align themselves with the message will find themselves in remunerated. They'll get better incomes. They'll get better opportunities. Justin Burns says, I could use some help starting my own channel. Justin, send me an email, nick at hazereviews.com. It's on the top of the screen now. Send me an email and I'll tell you everything I know and help you get set up to the best of my ability. I would love to do that. Frank says, the Saturday morning broadcasts are good for me because I can multitask as I listen. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're getting multiple useful things done at the same time. That's good. That's what it's all about. So, back to the text to finish off this chapter. I'm going to just restart this Institute of Pacific Relations section. I have discovered this catastrophic organization in some detail. I have discussed this catastrophic organization in some detail in an earlier chapter. It need only be added that it was one of the most important elements in the complex of international-minded organizations financed principally by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations. To the trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, I recommend that they place a large sign in each of their boardrooms reading, Remember IPR, as a constant reminder of what disastrous results can flow from abandoning supervision of activities financed by them and delegating their authority and judgment to intermediary organizations. The next section is interlocks with government. There have been interlocks between the international-minded foundations and the federal government even as early as World War I. The endowment went so far as to state in its 1933 yearbook that it, quote, is becoming an unofficial instrument of international policy, taking up here and there the ends and threads of international problems and questions which the governments find it difficult to handle, and, through private initiative, reaching conclusions which are not of a formal nature, but which unofficially find their way into the policies of governments. If we turn back to an earlier endowment report, 1925, we may recognize that this proud statement in the 1934 report represents a paean of victory. A paean. P-A-E-A-N. That's a new word for me. That's today's new word. Paean of victory. The 1925 report said, underneath and behind all these undertakings, there remains the task to instruct and to enlighten public opinion so that it may not only guide but compel the action of governments and public officers in the direction of constructive progress. Instruct and enlighten public opinion to compel the action of governments, right? And these are supposed to be apolitical. That a foundation could openly propose a plan to influence public opinion to the point where it in turn would coerce government is really quite astounding. Yeah, that's another important quote right there. 1925 report. With the great power of its money and its patronage, such a major foundation carries the capacity to do just that. Foundation promoted globalism. Okay, now we're getting into it. Considerable evidence exists that some of the major foundations and a group of satellite organizations operating in the field of international relations had ignored American interests in promoting internationalism of an unrealistic and dangerous nature. Excuse me. Professor Kenneth Colgrove testified, quote, "In my opinion, a great many of the staffs of the foundations have gone way beyond Wendell Willkie with reference to internationalism and globalism. There is undoubtedly too much money put into studies which support globalism and internationalism. You might say that the other side has not been as fully developed as it should be." Oh, thank you. Heidi says, "Pay Ian." It means a hymn, as in a Hymn, hymn. Thank you. Continuing. This opinion was emphatically shared by an American diplomat who should know his facts, Mr. Spruill Braden, former Assistant Secretary of State. He wrote to me, quote, "I have the very definite feeling that these various foundations you mention very definitely do exercise both overt and covert influences on our foreign relations, and that their influences are counter to the fundamental principles on which this nation was founded and which have made it great." The foundations to which I had referred were Carnegie Endowment, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Rhodes Scholarship Trust. To those mentioned might be added the Foreign Policy Association, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Institute of Pacific Relations, and the United Nations Association, all part of what the committee majority called a concentration of power. Professor Colgrove examined a list of books distributed by the Carnegie Endowment through its international mind alcoves and through the international relations clubs and centers which it created and supported in hundreds of universities and colleges. His comments on some of these run from globalist through ultra-globalist, Marxian slant, and subtle propaganda along communist lines to pro-communist and well-known communist. One wonders what kind of an international mind the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace intended to promote. The incomplete list of books which Professor Colgrove examined included works by such writers as Anna Louise Strong, a communist, Owen Lattimore, pro-communist, T.A. Bisson, pro-communist, Professor Nathaniel Peffer, who advocated our giving up in Korea, eating crow, recognizing Red China, assisting her in her financing, and admitting her to the United Nations, and Harold J. Lasky, the philosopher of British socialism. So yeah, Harold J. Lasky, he popped up quite a bit in the Rose Martin book, Fabian Freeway, and Juan Ratiu's book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, both of which are on the playlist tab on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey on the Hayes Reviews channels. Dr. Whitmer mentioned in his sworn statement that the endowment had distributed books also by Corliss Lamont, a noted pro-communist. Ruth Benedict, co-author with Jean Weltfish of a pamphlet finally barred by the War Department, her co-author, be it remembered, refused to state under oath whether or not she was a communist. Evans Clark, a former executive of the 20th Century Fund of Wide Communist Front Associations, and Alexander Worth, a European apologist for many communist causes. Right. Just checking how many pages we got left. Okay. This section is the international experts. The foundations participating in the combination of tax-exempt institutions in international affairs may say that they have used experts where they have found them, and that, indeed, if these have been globalist, it's because most experts have the globalist point of view. The Rees Committee report had this to say. It may well be said that a majority of the, quote, experts in the international field are on the side of globalism. It would be amazing if this were otherwise, after so many years of gigantic expenditure by foundations in virtually sole support of the globalist point of view. Professors and researchers have to eat and raise families. They cannot themselves spend the money to finance research and publications. The road to eminence in international areas, therefore, just as in the case of the social sciences generally, is by way of foundation grants or support. So they rigged the system and the structure of the system in such a way that the only possible route to having a career in this field of international relations and being an expert in this sort of stuff is through foundation funding. And everyone knows what the foundation, what are they called? The administrators in the foundations, everyone knows what they want to see, what their preferences are, what kind of studies and research that they actually fund. Everyone knows that, and this creates the consensus. Quote, sorry, no, this is not a quote. This is just continuing with Worms's text. Foreign policy is largely made by, quote, experts, technicians inside the State Department and other, quote, experts who influence policy from the outside. Through the operation of the foundation complex in the international field, therefore, the overwhelming majority of these experts, both inside and outside the department, have been indoctrinated with the globalist point of view which the Combine has fostered. Now, if you remember as well, in the preamble ramble, we looked at the Wilson building, which houses the Wilson Foundation, which has a president and CEO who is an expert in the think tank community. She would not have gotten anywhere near that role if she had ever expressed anything but alignment with globalism, internationalism, and the consensus, the artificial consensus that's been established and funded into existence by way of these foundations. All right, the next section is propaganda for UN. One. Right. I love Alan Watts' ability to see these deeper layered meanings in words, and he points out that UN is French for one. One what? One world government, right? UN. Propaganda for UN. The international mind obsession of the Carnegie Endowment and its associated organizations has avidly taken up the United Nations. No intelligent person could doubt the desirability of an effective and sensibly designed international organization, but the group of foundations and organizations of which the Carnegie Endowment is a leading member apparently believes that any organization should be supported if it is international. Nothing else could explain the truly intemperate propaganda which has been launched to indoctrinate our people into blind support of the United Nations. There has been no disposition whatever to be objective, to criticize what is fallacious and what is dangerous. There has been no debate on merits. There has been only propaganda in support. This group of foundations, led by the Carnegie Endowment, pours millions of dollars into propaganda to convince us that the United Nations organization is now constituted, is our light and our savior. The contrary point of view expressed by many Americans of eminence receives no circulation by this cabal for an unconditional acceptance of the United Nations and the multitude of its affiliates and programs. The detailed operation of the UN remains a mystery to most Americans. Supported to the extent of great sums by our government, the UN has numerous departments, commissions, and agencies busily at work. Some may result in great benefit, others are unquestionably meddlesome, useless, or dangerous. This is especially so because the proportion of communist and socialist representatives on these agencies is usually high. And that's backed up and explained as well in G. Edward Griffin's book, The Fearful Master, which also we read through on the channel and is on the playlists tab. Fantastic book. The interests of other nations come frequently into conflict with the national interests of the United States. Under the pressure of foreign governments, exerted often by a combination of collectivists, the United Nations many times has produced resolutions and taken steps in ways inimical to America. The Rees Committee report urgently suggested that the extent to which foundations have promoted, quote, the theory that we must subordinate our own economic welfare to that of the world in order to have peace is worth an investigation of its own. A recent publication by UNESCO acutely illustrates the need for such an investigation. Several years ago, UNESCO authorized the preparation of a series of books on the social sciences. The first of these has now appeared. It is called Economics and Action and was written by the former French Premier Mendes France with a collaborator. There will apparently be no other book on economics, so that this volume will stand and be widely circulated as the approved official United Nations Bible on economics. It is strongly anti-capitalist and frankly ardently collectivist piece of work. Others than socialists, communists, and extreme Keynesians will be horrified to read this UNESCO book, largely financed with American dollars. There's another one to look out for. Economics in Action by UNESCO. It will be interesting to see whether the Carnegie Endowment or any of its associated organizations, which so urgently propagandize for the United Nations and UNESCO, will offer even a modest criticism of this publication. Who knows what economic worldwide planning is being concocted by UN agencies, much of which will later be promoted domestically by these foundations, following their thesis that UN is the only road to peace. Nor should we forget the attempts to impose on us changes in our own basic declarations of human rights. That proposed by UN ignored the right to hold private property. Indeed, in the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, a resolution adopted against the opposition of the United States established the principle that no government may interfere with the right of other nations to expropriate or impair the property of its nationals. This is a discriminatory measure against private American investment abroad. You will own nothing and you will be happy. The NEA joins the parade. The National Education Association has worked overtime to inculcate into our children the idea that UN is a magnificent enterprise upon which rests the world's hope. And I got to pause right there to show you another book. Surprise, surprise. So on the topic of indoctrinating children, this book was mentioned in Ed Griffin's book, The Fearful Master. It's called You and the United Nations, written and illustrated by Lois Fisher. This is a beat up, messed up copy, so it's wrapped in plastic because the dust cover, as you can see, is all teared and ripped. But this is You and the United Nations. It's a children's book. And Children's Press, Chicago. And there's the typical globe with its net or divided into different sections. You always see those lines. It's kind of like a net or a cage or something. And this is 1947 publication. Children's Press expresses gratitude to Mrs. Harrison Thomas, Educational Director, American Association for the United Nations, Incorporated, for editing this book. And so, yeah, it's a picture book. It's got a nice little narrative, indoctrinating young people into getting perspective on the world's events. And look, the world looks like the people of the world are fighting. Look at them. Look at those founding fathers, angry, screaming and shouting at each other. Look at all these different peoples separated by these artificial fences. And they're all separated because of these fences that are nailed together with prejudice, ignorance, and fear. Nations had little to do with each other. There was just no international movement of peoples, no trade, no empire building, no invasions, no conquests. None of that was happening. Fences, distance, and languages meant that nations had little to do with each other. They just didn't mix. It was not easy for people to get together because they only had horses to ride on and camels. Then suddenly, airplanes, radios, diesels, and jets made all the people neighbors. We're all neighbors now in the global community. Actually, we are living and moving in one world, if you will. But this has all happened so fast that our minds have not kept pace. Of all living things, men and ants are the only ones who go in for organized destruction of their own kind. Ants will continue to practice the art of war, but men have the power of reason. People began to think seriously about how they could live together as world citizens, and that is how the United Nations began. And here it is, the crown on top of the globe, moon down here, representing the feminine, being left out, being abandoned, being shunned, looking uncomfortable with the way this is going. Sun, the masculine, very happy. The illumined ones, the Illuminati, very happy. Lots of downward pointing pentagrams as well. The General Assembly of the UN is the town meeting of the world. Yeah, so there you go. Pretty good, eh? Security Council, International Court of Justice. Yeah. So, quite a nice little artifact there. I give thanks to G. Edward Griffin for writing his book and including this, mentioning this one. And then I thank God for the internet. Did I say God? I meant DARPA. But the internet does afford us this opportunity to get our hands on rare books and publications such as that one. To show you that when Worms is claiming here that children are being indoctrinated into the idea that the UN is magnificent, upon which rests the world's hope, there you go. He's telling the truth. He's not making it up. I wonder how many copies of that book were printed and where they were distributed. I bet there was no problem getting that book into the library. Heidi, maybe you should take a copy of that down to the library, see it, or ask them if they've already got a copy. I'm sure they won't have a problem with that being in there. That book is from 47, I think it was, or 48. 1947, 1948. Definitely late 40s. All right. Imagine this being included in its Education for International Understanding in American Schools, Suggestions and Recommendations, partly financed by the Carnegie Corporation. Quote, through its Security Council, every dispute that affects the peace of the world can be brought before an international body endowed with authority to take all necessary steps for the restraint of aggression. As the committee report said, quote, to impose this concept upon our children in the schools is to teach them nonsense. The futility of the United Nations in settling international disputes has been tragically evident. And this futility, moreover, is not the result of a failure on our part to be international-minded. This book was prepared by the NEA's Committee on International Relations, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, and the National Council for the Social Studies. The use of the term social studies or core studies should always give pause. It is likely to indicate that children are to be fed educational material in accordance with the recommendations of the Commission on Social Studies of the American Historical Association, to which I have earlier referred. Propaganda toward a collectivism which now has broadened to international collectivism, otherwise known as globalism. The same volume asserts that we must conform our national economic policies to an international world economy, that the nation-state system is obsolete, that part of our political independence must be surrendered, that we must engage on a planned economic cooperation on a worldwide scale, and that our children must be taught to become propagandists for these ideas. That's page 193. The school is to be a militant agent in the campaign for the globalist idea. That's pretty amazing. And on that topic of, let's see, what is it? The nation-state system is obsolete. That was also what Zbigniew Brzezinski told us in Between Two Ages, which I also read on the channel. That's in the playlists. Excellent book. But he says the same thing there, only that was in the 70s. I'm doubting myself. This was published. It doesn't say. It'll be on my playlist tab. Yeah, 1970. There it is. So he was saying the same thing there. Same thing that's repeated in the First Global Revolution by the Club of Rome. That book, it says at the beginning, is for children. It says in the intro that it's for young people because it's the young people basically who we can indoctrinate and brainwash with the global climate warming scam. And now here we are with, Greta. Little girls from Sweden dream of silver screen quotations. That's the line from Red Hot Chili Peppers' song Californication, which some people claim is a reference to Greta. And that song also has the line, space is the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. But actually, I think it was made in a warehouse somewhere in England. But anyway. The International Social Science Research Council. This is our final 4 pages, so let's get this done. And then we'll get back to our weekends. Significant, too, was the creation of an International Social Science Research Council. This was called into being through UNESCO action and at the instance of Oliver Myrdal. I think this might be the same one which Pendleton Herring was overseeing, ISSR. Ms. Myrdal, a militant socialist who was once denied a visa by our State Department, is the wife of Gunnar Myrdal, the author of An American Dilemma. Mrs. Myrdal was director of the Department of Social Sciences of UNESCO when she proposed the formation of an international SSRC in 1951. The first council meeting took place in Paris in December of that year. Donald Young took part in this meeting and played an important role in the organization of the council. He was, at the time, president of the Russell Sage Foundation and had previously been president of the Social Science Research Council. Oh, okay. So that's what I'm thinking of. The Social Science Research Council, I think, is the American version, and that was Pendleton Herring, who was running that at some point, or who was the president for a while. This is the international SSRC. So this bit is about Donald Young. Donald Young is one of the central characters of the dramatis personae of the Foundation complex. Another of the chief American participants was Professor Otto Kleinberg of Columbia University, well known as a social scientist, far to the left, and incidentally a contributor to An American Dilemma. This new organization is worth watching. Apparently it is to act internationally in the clearinghouse and directive fashion in which the SSRC functions domestically. It seems to have intended to ape the undemocratic setup of its American counterpart. The charter proposed at the organization meeting provided not for a democratic representation of social scientists from the participating nations, but instead for a method of self-perpetuating domination similar to that which I have earlier described as in use in the domestic SSRC. This form of organization would have permitted the domination and utilization of this prestige organization by a closed clique to the exclusion of all dissidents and nonconformists. Foundation International Meddling. If only the boards of trustees of great foundations, overwhelmingly composed of responsible and well-meaning men of distinction, would come to realize that the great funds they administer can be used to as devastating an effect in the world of men's minds as can the nuclear bomb in the man's physical world. To rely upon professional employees to do their thinking for them can be hazardous to an extreme. If that seems a strong statement, consider the case of Mr. Hiss. In 1947, Mr. Hiss was president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Its yearbook then contained recommendations of the president to the trustees. Now that the United Nations had been established in New York, said Mr. Hiss, The opportunity for an endowed American institution having the objectives, tradition, and prestige of the endowment to support and serve the United Nations is very great. He then recommended that the endowment create a program centering its activities on popularizing the United Nations and assisting it. This program, he said, should be widely educational. At this point, I think we might as well just start swapping out the words education and educational for propaganda and propagandistic. Widely propagandistic. And should not only create public opinion, right? You don't get to create your own opinion, you individuals and members of the public. No, we create your opinion for you. That's the message here. Create public opinion, but, quote, aid in the adoption of wise policies both by our own government in its capacity as a member of the United Nations and by the United Nations organization as a whole, the UNO. The following section of Mr. Hiss's recommendations is worth reproducing in its entirety. Quote, the number and importance of decisions in the field of foreign relations with which the United States will be faced during the next few years are of such magnitude that the widest possible stimulation of public education/propaganda in this field is of major and pressing importance. In furthering its educational/propagandistic objectives, the endowment should utilize its existing resources, such as the international relations clubs in the colleges and international conciliation, and should strengthen its relationships with existing agencies interested in the field of foreign affairs. These relationships should include close collaboration with other organizations principally engaged in the study of foreign affairs, such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Foreign Policy Association, the Institute of Pacific Relations, the Developing University Centers of International Studies, and local community groups interested in foreign affairs, of which the Cleveland Council on World Affairs and the projected World Affairs Council in San Francisco are examples. Of particular importance is the unusual opportunity of reaching large segments of the population by establishing relations of a rather novel sort with the large national organizations which today are desirous of supplying their members with objective information on public affairs, including international issues. These organizations, designed to serve respectively the broad interests of business, church, women's, farm, labor, veterans, educational, and other large groups of our citizens, are not equipped to set up foreign policy research staffs of their own. The endowment should supply these organizations with basic information about the United Nations and should assist them both in selecting topics of interest to their members and in presenting those topics so as to be most readily understood by their members. We should urge the Foreign Policy Association and the Institute of Pacific Relations to supply similar service on other topics of international significance. Exploration should also be made by the endowment as to the possibilities of increasing the effectiveness of the radio and motion pictures in public education/propaganda on world affairs. To what extent Mr. Hiss managed to get his program rolling before his departure for prison, I do not know. That was very sassy line there from Wormser. He was not long enough in office to perpetrate on the American public as much damage as he was capable of. But one can well see today the execution by his successors of the policies formulated in the 1947 yearbook. And it's worthy of note that his recommendations speak in terms of using a complex or close interlocking association with other foundations and kindred groups, including the nefarious Institute of Pacific Relations. A propaganda agency such as the Carnegie Endowment can so easily become a vehicle for intended subversion. What is equally dangerous is that it can fall into the administrative hands of incompetent, negligent, or misguided persons against whom the trustees, ultimately responsible for its action, can protect themselves only through either the most attentive alertness or through an abandonment of the basically hazardous occupation of propaganda. As Dr. Frederick P. Keppel, himself president of the Carnegie Corporation, a sister organization of the endowment, put it, Quote, danger arises whenever any group with power in its hands, whether it be a state legislature or the board of a university or of a foundation, believes it to be its business to use its power to direct opinion. Any such group is a dangerous group, regardless of the manner of its makeup and regardless of whether its action is conscious or unconscious, and, if conscious, whether benign or sinister in purpose. Mr. Joseph E. Johnson, president of the Carnegie Endowment, played down the role of his foundation in world affairs in his statement to the Reece Committee. He attributed changes in American attitudes toward foreign relations to the problems created by modern social and political upheavals, by new inventions, and by 2 world wars. Yeah, because the Round Table groups and the Cecil Rhodes groups and the Rhodes Society people didn't have anything to do with those 2 world wars, did they? No. Also, this idea of, what did he say? New inventions. New inventions. Like Huxley does this as well. Huxley talks about the development of technology as just like I think he calls it an impersonal force. It's just this impersonal force that's just out there occurring like gravity, if you believe in that. Then there's nothing we can do about it, as though it's not human driven, as though it's not funded into existence, as though it's not a product of the military industrial complex and the black budgets and the experimentation that is done on the human population, right? Like the development of technology is guided by humans, not all of us, some of us, a small clique, right? Those dominant minorities. So it's always a cop-out when I see them talk about the impersonal evolution of technology as a force that's steering things and driving things. It's just it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, let's finish this bit off. Yeah, like he says, the argument is not convincing. Exactly. This argument is not convincing. Even if the endowment merely reinforced what was a basic trend, its activities could not help but have a strong accelerating impact on public opinion. The endowment, in any event, has not confined itself to studies and discussions of public issues, but has engaged in political propaganda for particular points of view, much of this propaganda directed to influencing legislation. That is the end of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 on next week's live stream is the Ford Foundation Gargantua of Philanthropy. We're going to be getting into the Ford Foundation, but for now, we are going to wrap up today's live stream. What do you think about that? I'm going to sip my coffee. I feel like I've earned a sip. That was an excellent chapter. I knew that was going to be a good chapter. Got a couple of comments here. I was once a wholehearted citizen of the world, Heidi says. They had me good for a long time. I want to rant now, but I won't. Please do rant. You know, you start your own YouTube channel and I want to hear your rants. Or yes, put it in the Telegram channel. I have a Telegram channel it's on Telegram, over on Telegram. You can tell I've been speaking for 3 hours straight. You can join that by going to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. There's a little link there you can click and join the chat. There's a broadcast channel, and then there's a kind of a linked chat channel as well. It's not super lively. You won't be getting bombarded with notifications all day long. It's not one of those where I'm just posting constantly, but it's there if you want to ask questions, share resources, bounce some ideas around, and meet some cool people. We've got some people in there who've been following along and participating for a number of years now, which is very exciting. It's funny, you know, I was looking back at the channel and I started doing this 3 years ago. Put out my first video reviewing a book by Mark Devlin, The Musical Truth. He's a DJ. He's written a series of books about the music industry and all the shenanigans that are going on there. And here we are, 3 years later. We're reading our 14th book, I think it is, in its entirety on the channel. And the more we read, the more recordings and live streams we do, the better we understand these agendas, because we can see how they interlock. We're learning about the different people, events, and the groups And we're learning the side of things that doesn't get given to us in our schooling, because as we're learning here, the schooling is incredibly biased. It is one-sided. It is a history that's written by the victors. We don't get a balance. We don't get the competing view, and it's out there, but it's in dusty books. So we got to pick them up and crack them and get between the covers every once in a while, right? So, yeah, I appreciate you all being here. Frank and boy howdy, thank you for hanging out. Heidi. We had someone else. Justin as well was here earlier. I'll have a quick look on Rumble just to make sure I haven't missed anybody. And Odyssey. Nope, haven't missed anybody. So there you are. Let's wrap it up. So I'll be back next week, probably the same time, Saturday morning. I'll prepare another little review and preamble ramble. This is going to be the format moving forward. So I hope you are all doing well. Justin just popped into the chat with a recommendation saying, need to get into In the Minds of Men, Darwin and the New World Order by Ian T. Taylor. You know, that book is right behind me. I'm so excited to read this one. I'm really excited to read this one. Maybe we could do this one next after Foundations, because yeah, I'm just so excited to read it. It's right up my street. So there it is. It's on the list. It's gonna be it's on its way. So yeah, if you want to support allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews, that's the way to get involved. I've got my 2 resources, ultimatereadinglist.com, which is a full 800 plus books that are in my library, grouped according to theme and topic, so you can use that for inspiration. And you got continuityofcontrol.com as well. That's my mini course email series. It's free, and it just groups together some of the spiciest quotes of the last 70 years, starting with H.G. Wells, bringing us all the way up to David Rockefeller's memoirs, which we talked about in tonight's stream. Yeah, Justin, yeah, Alan Watt did mention this book. I've got pretty much every book that Alan mentioned, I think. Most of them. I've definitely got most of them. I haven't got all of them yet, but yeah, I miss him too. I do miss him. But you know, he's still with us. He put out so many hundreds, if not thousands of hours in his archive that we can go back to and still continuously learn from. And actually, I'm reading at the moment. Oh, it's in the other room. Well, I can show you this version. At the moment, I'm reading Cutting Through by Alan Watt. Now, this is the Guerrilla first edition that Alan used to copy and bind himself for everyone who ordered it, right? There's recently been a reissue, a second edition, which is printed in perfect bound, and it's got all this updated artwork and imagery and an introduction and an outro and an author bio. It's beautiful. I left it in the other room because I was reading it there last night. But I'm reading that at the moment, and then we're going to have Melissa come on and talk to us about Alan and the book. And it's actually 3 books in one. It's volumes 1, 2, and 3, Cutting Through by Alan Watt. If you're interested in that, go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Alan did amazing, invaluable work and influenced many, many, many of us here in the alternative media sphere. And, you know, he needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And, you know, and often I think people should just go and listen to Alan. I'm honored that people come and hang out here and talk to me and listen to me go on. But Alan had a way of with words and a way of expressing it that I don't think anyone else has really ever matched. He's got a calm, reassuring, smooth delivery that is just, yeah, it's really unique, one of a kind, you know. So yeah, definitely go check out Alan Watt's work. So let's wrap it up there. 3 hours. It's 12:34. 1, 2, 3, 4. Always nice to end on a bit of numerology if you're into that stuff. So thanks for hanging out. I've said all the links. You know what to do if you want to get in touch. Shoot me an email, nick@hayesreviews.com. Always glad to hear from people. I am going to end it there. Take care, everybody. Do something that lifts up your spirit, that fills your soul with excitement and gratitude, and take good care of the people around you. And love your neighbor, and find something creative to do, because we are not the creator, but we are endowed with the creative, the ability to create. And so in whatever way, shape, or form you can put that to use, it's valuable and it's worth doing. So that's the message I want to leave you on today. Take care of yourselves. God bless.